Good evening. Good evening. I'd like to call this meeting of the University Heights City Council to order. Today is April 2nd, 2018. Happy spring. Oh wait, where's one moment. Okay. Mrs. Thomas, will you call the roll, please?
Mr. Rock?
Here.
Mr. Weisman?
Here.
Mr. Sims?
Here.
Mrs. Pardee?
Here.
Mr. Erdl?
Here.
Mrs. Cameron? Mrs. Wise?
Here.
Is there a motion to excuse Mrs. Cameron?
So moved.
Second.
Okay, motion by Mr. Wiseman, second by Mrs. Pardee. Any discussion? Mrs. Thomas, will you call the roll on the motion?
Mr. Rock?
Aye.
Mr. Weisman?
Aye.
Mr. Sims?
Aye.
Mrs. Pardee?
Aye.
Mr. Erdl?
Aye.
Mrs. Wise?
Aye.
All who are able, please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Next item on the agenda is the approval of minutes. We have two sets of minutes that have been distributed, the regular meeting of March 19th, as well as the special meeting of March 26th. We should take them separately, I think. So is there a motion with regard to the minutes of March 19th? If there is no motion, we could table these till the next meeting if we need more time to review them. Councilman Rock?
I can make a motion.
Okay,
to
Mr.
approve minutes from March 19th.
We have a motion to approve the minutes for March 19th. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Mrs. Weiss. Is there any discussion? Seeing no discussion, Mrs. Thomas, will you call the roll, please?
Mr. Rock?
Aye.
Mr. Mr. Weisman?
Aye.
Mr. Sims?
Pass.
Mrs. Pardee?
Pass.
Mr. Erdl?
Aye.
Mrs. Wise?
Aye.
We also have a set of minutes from March 26th, the special meeting. Is there a motion on these minutes?
So moved.
Okay.
Second.
Okay, motion to accept by Mrs. Weiss, second by, there were multiple seconds, I'll say, by Mr. Erdl. Is there any discussion? Ms. Thomas, will you call the roll, please?
Mr. Rock?
Aye.
Mr. Weisman?
Aye.
Mr. Sims?
Aye.
Mrs. Pardee?
Aye.
Mr. Erdl?
Aye.
Mrs. Wise?
Okay, very good. Next item on the agenda is comments from the audience. Speakers are limited to 5 minutes. By ordinance, we may limit that to 15 minutes per meeting. I know that there are a number of people who want to speak, however, so we will allow a little more time if necessary. At the same time, many of you have already spoken at the previous meeting. If you choose to speak again, fine. That is within your right, of course. But we would ask that in the interest of time and fairness to everyone who does intend to speak, if you would be economical in your comments and proceed accordingly. And also, unlike the last meeting, we will limit you to one trip to the podium. So come up, say your piece, and then sit down. Thank you. Is there anyone who would like to address the city at this time? Everyone who speaks, if you would state your name and address for the record, please.
Jeff Green, 2568 Eaton Road, University Heights. Based upon the potential passage of a revision to the currently chicken ordinance in University Heights, a group of concerned citizens and registered voters have formed a coalition against this action. Many of those are here tonight, and if they could raise their hands for those who are against the ordinance. To be fair, those who are for the ordinance may also raise their hand. In order to be efficient, we have consolidated our thoughts, positions, related questions to be delivered. I will speak on these questions, most of which have very brief and direct answers, which should also save time. Many of these questions either wanted to be asked at the last meeting or have come up as a consequence of this potential action and is the desire of those requesting the actions that they be brought up. Questions from our coalition. The first comment relates to data obtained from the Cuyahoga County Auditor. We have all this documented in a spreadsheet should anyone desire a copy. We merely point out this glaring statistic to demonstrate that despite the existence of similar ordinances related to chickens in other municipalities, said locations are not comparable to our city. Firstly, they are not comparable in the example of Beechwood requiring 1.1 acres of land in order to house chickens, whereas our proposal is greatly less. Secondly, the housing, not the population densities, in units per square mile of the respective cities are the following. Beechwood, 588. Shaker Heights, 1,123. Lakewood, 1,400. Cleveland Heights, 1,590. University Heights, 2,190. It is certainly discordant to have a requirement of approximately 260 square feet for chickens in University Heights, which I took as the square footage referenced in the ordinance proposal, whereas an acre in Beechwood is necessary. For those who don't know, an acre consists of 43,560 square feet. Even more disturbing is the fact that the housing density in University Heights is 272% higher than that in Beechwood. Clearly, these situations are nowhere near comparable. Could it be that the explanation that a square peg was forced into a round hole or a tail wagged the dog with this ordinance so that currently a single family that desires this change would have the limited dimensions proven acceptable? Next point I want to make is it's a question for the council. How does this alteration classify as an emergency measure for the preservation of public space, health, safety in the city? Sounds like a legal boilerplate. What is the definition of an emergency?
Did you want to address that?
I mean, an emergency is an emergency. I think that the desire of council was to allow for residents to purchase chicks in a time frame that would allow them to raise them beginning this year, and that timing issue was the justification for the emergency.
To put it maybe in more layman's type terms, by considering on an emergency, if it passes, it becomes effective upon the signature of the mayor, whereas if it's not passed on emergency, it waits 30 days before it's effective.
Correct, that's correct.
Okay. It also has a voting differential too, as you mentioned last time, right?
That's correct.
Okay.
It has a voting differential if the reading rule is suspended, but in this case, we're not suspending the reading rule. We've had 2 readings as required by the charter. So the reason that there is a vote differential in this instance is because the Planning Commission voted 2-1 to recommend that council not approve. And under our ordinances, if council is going to go against the Planning Commission recommendation, they have to do it by a supermajority requiring 5 affirmative votes.
Okay, thank you. What will next is another question. What will the complaint process be for the ordinance? Will it wait for complaints from citizens, or will this be reviewed by the building commission periodically?
There are, do you want me to answer these questions?
Sure, go ahead, if you don't mind.
There are a couple of proposed revisions to the ordinance that are being considered tonight, and one of them I think is on point to your question. The way this is going to work is An applicant will make their application to the building department. The building commissioner will be obligated to review the application and decide whether the requirements of the ordinance are met or not. If the requirements of the ordinance are met, the building commissioner will issue a permit, a special use permit that'll be in effect for 1 year. If the requirements are not met, the building commissioner will deny the application for a permit. So if a permit is issued, it will stay in effect for 1 year, at which point it would come before the Board of Zoning Appeals for renewal. And at that point, a hearing would be held where an appearance would be required by the applicant to renew the special use permit.
Thank you. Under the conditions of the stated pilot program, would it not be more appropriate to have the ordinance terminate at a specified time and then be properly reevaluated and then enacted more fully once it is deemed acceptable? Instead, the apparent burden of proof to terminate this ordinance is incumbent upon those only bringing to light problems. Therefore, this appears to be, despite the wording, to be a full ordinance to be redacted with problematic evidence instead of a pilot program that would be intentionally reevaluated at a specified point in time, which is more of a true definition of a pilot. It is also almost unthinkable to have manure as little as 5 feet from a neighbor's house. If you've ever driven by an animal farm, odors travel further than 5 feet. This fits into the square peg in the round hole theory, and contrary to a universal recommendation of this regulation for an entire city, it appears it was customized to reach the individual specifications of an individual residence. Along the same lines, though it remains to be seen how popular this may be, it is almost humorous that a single-family request has taken up so much time and goodwill stock in our community, given the rarity of the current request. We were dismayed when 2 weeks ago the opportunity to fully vote on this issue was tabled by the council after realizing that they did not have enough votes to pass the emergency ordinance. It was clear that the council was chickening out. If it was tabled for the opportunity to make revisions, have any been made? And does this mean that the tabling leaves the door open to further changes? Just for clarification, this is a quick answer. This proposal is for owner-occupied locations only, is that correct?
It is for single family, it is for homes zoned in a U1 district, which is a single family dwelling. A single family dwelling doesn't necessarily have to be owner occupied, it can be a rental.
So it can be a rental. Right. Though this is pure speculation on, and this is my last point, though this is pure speculation on everyone's part and convenient political positioning for some, we collectively believe that the viewpoints of the citizens of University Heights on this issue is nowhere near 50-50. We believe that it is overwhelmingly against such a passing for many of the logical reasons that have already been mentioned. We may have a chance to know this statistic for sure over the next 30 days, as we expect that this ordinance will pass, and our coalition's efforts will then be to seek the necessary signatures in order to petition for either a repeal of this ordinance or a submitted vote for all the citizens of University Heights. This would be the purest form of democracy on this controversy by letting the majority of voters state their desire rather than having a few members of council go against what we believe to be the consensus feelings of the entire constituency. Through this process, we will also be able to ascertain if this is truly what millennials want, as has been purported by some council members gathered from limited sample sizes and promulgated to indicate that this is the prevailing rationale. During this petitioning process, we will collect demographics on who is for or against this action and whether or not it is truly demarcated along the age lines favoring millennials. Even if this is the case, we believe that an overemphasis on, by definition, short-termers in our city and unproven in terms of decades-long commitments to our municipality is an unwise and unfair political stance, as it does not weigh equally and respectfully the concerns of all citizens. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'll make it really short and brief. The name is Paul Miller, 2370 Charney Road. And I address my one question to Mr. Rock, to Mr. Wiseman, to Ms. Pardee, Ms. Weiss. Just one question. You could please tell me why you're in favor to have this ordinance? I'd like to know. As a citizen, I deserve to know. So do the people in the audience.
Would the named members like to address Mr. Miller now or wait for the agenda item to discuss their positions on the ordinance?
Mayor, I'd like to wait for when this is up for the vote and we're discussing it. That's when I'd like to make my remarks.
Okay, very good. Thank you.
Does everyone else feel that way? And I plan to answer that question, Mr. Miller.
I'm sorry?
I plan to answer that question.
Okay, good. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Miller.
Hi, my name's April Urban, and I'm a University Heights resident. I live at 3590 Meadowbrook Boulevard, and I really just came out to show support for the ordinance. I know it can be tough to get people to come out to support something, and a little easier to get people to come out against something. In addition to my residency in University Heights, I do work in the community development sphere in Cleveland. And I could also just add that communities across the nation are adopting similar ordinances and have had positive results.
Thank you, Ms. Urban. If you have something to say, you may address at the podium, but somebody else is already on the way up.
Oh, no, go ahead, I'm sorry. Hello, I'm Lauren Strad, 3830 Faversham Road. I just wanted to show that I am a millennial. I am not part of what they want. I do not believe that we should be having chickens in our area. My husband and I came here within the last 2 years from the Akron area. We had over an acre of land, and our neighbors also had barnyard animals. We came up here to University Heights because we wanted to be close, not only to the city, but have this urban feel in a suburban area. So, you know, it's just not something that we want to see every day in our backyard, you know, going out, putting the trash away. So I, you know, just want to make a comment that I understand that Beechwood and Shaker and the other communities are for it, and they have been doing this for a while, but let's be unique. Let's be that community that is not trying to be like everyone else. Let's show them that we are who we are and that our community stands behind us. And let's look at other ways to make this community great. So, thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Cindy Oser, and I live at 2440 Eaton Road. And I'm here in support of chickens, and I'm in support of chickens in University Heights. I'm not a millennial, obviously. I did grow up on a farm, and we did raise chickens, and we did eat the eggs, and we eat the chickens. So just, that's my chicken cred. I have a few points. I do think chickens are friendly pets, like the dogs and cats that many of us have. But I think beyond that, they have educational value. I worry that children don't know where their food comes from, and I think this would be a great way to show that. I think that as a nurse, I've heard a lot about parasites and disease. Simple hand washing would take care of that. I also really appreciate the way that chickens give back. They give daily, fresh, healthy eggs. And for people like me who are not planning to apply for a permit, we might benefit from the fertilizer for our gardens. My house already backs up onto Cleveland Heights, so my neighbors could already have chickens. So, you know, we're already, and I would appreciate that. And finally, as a gardener, I think that chickens provide a pesticide-free pest control, and I think the slugs, the grubs, the mosquitoes that they eat would probably benefit all of us. So I think that what I've heard is that you've responded to many of the concerns with limiting the number of permits and stronger regulations, and I appreciate that, and I really hope you'll take positive action on the ordinance tonight. Pardon my voice. And Cole, thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Ozer.
I'm Arlene Tempsey at 3873 Grenville Road, and listening so far, and I've been up here several times, I think although I understand a little better when I got an explanation as to why you need to pass something, and in fairness to this young couple, but I do think that the distance that you are giving is much too close for the homes in this area. And when I spoke to City Hall in Beechwood, I know that they did say only a handful of properties would be large enough to even allow such a thing. So I do think that we need to consider how small our properties are. And I will still maintain that I know in my particular situation, there's enough issues already have nothing to do with chickens that cause problems with neighbors. And even though I've been told in one situation I was correct, I don't want to say anything so this person doesn't talk to me for another 10 years. I think we're asking for a lot of trouble. I think that I know that I have a fenced-in yard. If my dog is out there, he's never out there alone. But if I were to have him out, and he does get tied to the house for 10 minutes or less, a couple times a day, if he hears chickens squawking, he's going to be barking. And I know one of my neighbors called the police several times, and they'd come out and my dog wasn't even out there. So now you're asking for dogs that are properly taken care of to cause a nuisance in the neighborhood. And then we have to go and complain to who? So we complain to the building department, the police, whoever. I just think we're asking for a lot of unnecessary trouble in this city. So for whatever the good is, and I can see that, there's a lot more bad. And I just think our properties are too small, most of them. I think we should reconsider the amount of space. And I'm very happy how I get rid of my indoor cats business and my dogs. And the smell would be just really, and the noise too much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Richard Passo, 2604 Siebert Road. And I'm going to change the subject, but sneak back around. How's that? On the agenda, there's a reference about 1280.10 about the rentals. And reading the ordinance, I think we might want to clarify when you discuss it about what the differences are. I noticed about eliminating about the three unrelated and clarifying that statement, but also about the C and G. I started to read it and I kind of blurred over and whatever. And I think that one of the things that we should have in the ordinance, where we talk about the number of bedrooms in the rental, that it also adds that you verify with the county records what the home is listed as having. I don't know how many are still around, but there were quite a few homes in University Heights that had a bathroom on the 3rd floor. However, it was never finished into a bedroom. And I'm quite sure people have converted that into a bedroom, but for tax purposes, never change that with the county, so I think we need to make a reference there if possible. But if you just could briefly clarify what the changes are in the new rental law, okay? And the other thing that I want to sneak back on is at the March 26th meeting, there was a discussion from council about old laws. There's a lot of old laws on record that are discriminatory and exclusionary, and even though there weren't any in University Heights, it was something that was prevalent and was especially brought to attention in the civil rights movement, that there were laws to keep blacks out, to segregate the schools, etc. That was fine, but then the statement was made that the commercial truck law about not having a vehicle parked in the yard with a commercial sign, that was a law that was meant to exclude blue-collar workers, and that's not true. That law came about because there was a gentleman, and I believe it was right here on Silsby, and the law isn't that old, had a big panel van that he was parking in the front of his yard and leaving it there. And the neighbors, of course, started to complain. What brought it to the head was then the contractors wanted to know how they could get in on this free advertising. How could they get their trucks into other people's yards to sit outside? So the ordinance came about, one, because of that, but also if you can't park it into the garage or take the signs off, you can't be parking it on your property because it was free advertising. And I don't know if we changed the ordinance, but I noticed that there are 2 vans that sit down in Meadowbrook, parked out prominently, and I won't say who they're advertising, but these advertising is business all the time. There used to be, and it's only recently that it stopped, there was one of the cable companies, big truck, that would move out of his yard and be parked out of the front. He would then move it out onto the street, put the orange barrels around it over the weekend, so it sat there a whole weekend, and he moved it back in his yard. So again, it wasn't to keep blue-collar workers out, it was because of the free advertisement of what it was doing. It also was referenced about the law in 1944 was meant to keep out the farmers, kick them out of University, excuse me, it was the village at that time. No, it was greed, it was capitalism. We had all these properties, and where are you gonna make the money? How are you gonna get the population? Because we only have a small 3-square-mile area, and that's just build as many houses and get as many residents as you can. So again, it wasn't discrimination, it was a purpose to the law. It's like, how many people know why John Carroll University is where it's at? Why didn't you go out to Notre Dame? And it was because the trolley ended here. And Notre Dame had to come down and pick up the students. My father went to John Carroll before it was built. He was the first graduating class from it, but they had stopped construction because they ran out of money and he had a picture taken. He attended John Carroll in the Heights, but it was because the trolley ended there. My mother used to walk up to Notre Dame, and of course it was uphill going there, uphill coming back, and it rained every day when class started and when class ended. So these are things that we need to be careful as to what we say and the assumptions that we make on why some of these laws are around. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Passoff. Is there anyone else who would like to address the city?
Yeah, good evening. I know I've been here a few times.
Okay.
But speaking of space, I just, last time I was here, I mentioned my house and how it was landlocked between 6 different residences. Comment was made that, it may not have all the chickens there, but realistically, I have the possibility of having 24 chickens around me while I'm sitting and eating on my patio. And to piggyback off of Mr. Green's comments, do you guys know the square, how big University Heights is? Square miles?
1.9, yeah.
What is it?
1.9.
1.819. We're gonna have 24 permits, is that right? That you're giving out?
I believe it's 25 in the ordinance.
25 permits?
Up to.
So 4 chickens per permit? that allows for over 55 or almost 55 chickens per square mile in our city. Has that been thought of? Does that seem excessive to anybody? That's one thing I'd like to claim. And if another thing, I would respectfully ask that if you're going to do this, that we increase the dimensions, the space, the size that these chickens would have to be in, to make it fair for everyone, for every single person. Not to be, if you look at my house, 6 properties butt to my backyard. So as one family wants to have chickens, one family would prefer not to. So, and I do have a question. I'm just curious for the law director. Last meeting, which was not last week, but the week before, when we tabled this, when you guys tabled this, it was mentioned that Mr. Weisman said that he had discussed this with Ms. Pardee, and he knows that she was for it. Does that have any ramifications with open meeting laws?
No.
And sunshine laws?
No.
Because it seemed to me as if the whole thing was manipulated.
The reality is
through
that
the meeting and the minutes and the video, there's quite a case for that to be made.
there's no sunshine law violation that's created by conversation among council members. The sunshine law is violated if a quorum of council members or other members of a municipal body gather to discuss public business. There's no evidence that that's occurred. There have been numerous public meetings on this topic, including committee meetings at which council members during settings that were open to the public have voiced their opinions. And I don't want to put words into Mr. Weisman's mouth, but I think he was referring back to public statements that Ms. Pardee has made. There's no evidence of any sunshine law.
He said that he had discussed it.
Well, even if he did, that's not a sunshine law violation. It would be 4 members of council convening for the express purpose of discussing public business that would create the violation.
May I?
Yes, please.
Mr. Tranchito, I did attend the building committee meetings where this was vetted in depth. We talked about it at length, and it would have been very clear that I was in favor of this because I was favorably disposed as we discussed it in the building committee and tried to work out the best way to craft legislation to make this happen if it made sense. So it was absolutely something that was
Okay.
No.
Well, when he said he discussed it with you, it sounded like that's
Yeah.
what it sounded like to not only me, to other people. So.
okay. Well, thank you
And
for
if
asking
wouldn't
for the
mind passing that
clarification.
around.
I have to jump in. I had discussed it with her because I called her earlier in the day to see how she felt and to see if she was going to be.
I'm just curious. I'm not
I'm-
accusing. I
I understand.
just want to know.
Okay,
That's
so let me tell you what I'm thinking. I had called her and discussed it with her, as I'm allowed to as a council member. 4 of us can't meet in a group and say, how are we going to vote? Let's do this, because that's a majority of the board. 2 of us can talk. If 2 of us couldn't talk before meetings and between meetings, we would get nothing done, and our meetings would be 18 hours apiece. So I did call her and ask her, as I would think you would want me to do as a council person, to talk to my colleagues before the meeting and to see what's going on and to make sure we all understand each other and what we're doing. So yes, I did call her and did find out that she was for it. And I was expressing the fact that she actually wasn't at the meeting. That's why I felt comfortable to say that. The only reason I'm answering now is because it's easy to say sunshine laws, and I don't want people to read this and think that we violated or came close to violating the sunshine law. It's something we take very seriously, and we would not do that on purpose.
No, it was just it's open meeting thing. So it struck me weird because it was tabled to seemingly to get it to the way you wanted it. So That's why I came up. I mean, it just seemed to be. So, as I said again, and I'll repeat, if you could, want to do this, I would respectfully ask you to increase the size or the distance that these things, that these coops, that these chickens can be kept in our city. There's probably several properties similar to mine throughout this city. And when you have 2,200 houses per square mile, when you have Lakewood, which is over 6 square miles, Cleveland Heights is over 6 square miles, we're not even 2 square miles. 50 chickens per square mile. Thank you.
Thank you.
Evening. My name is Kyle Coughlin. I live on Meadowbrook. Just real quick, just because my wife and I are the most vocal of the residents who are in support of chickens certainly does not mean that we are the only folks who are looking to have chickens in our backyard. We are fighting for a right that we believe that we should have. And to add to that, our founding fathers created this country with the idea that people have the right to provide for their families, independent of the government. It was not too many years ago when nearly every home in America had at least a few chickens to provide meat and eggs for their families. During wartime, it had even been considered a patriotic duty to raise chickens to provide food for oneself and one's family. Today, consumers are at the mercy of enterprise production and governmental regulation to ensure our health and food sources. Our food supply is readily affected by pollution, pesticides, side effects from pharmaceuticals, and trade restrictions. Recalls for Listeria, Salmonella, and E. coli are weekly news events. As a citizen of this country and of this community, it is my right to bear arms to protect, it is protected by the government, but I do not have the right to provide my own sustainable food. Food where I control if pesticides or hormones are used. To me, this seems to be in conflict with the rights that our country was built on. I hope that tonight our city government makes a decision that is aligned with the spirit of our country, that decisions are made based on facts and not personal feelings and preconceived notions. I hope that I have the right to raise chickens. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm Bert Siebert. I've been a resident of University Heights for over 70 years. We moved up University Heights in 1943 during the war. Nobody had chickens in their yards because we had stores that sold eggs. I don't see why we need chickens. I've got a herd of deer in my yard. Can you harvest those? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Siebert.
Justin, I'm Laura's neighbor. I'm remiss to say my name on the record for fear that Cleveland.com will put another libertarian spin to my comments that will be sent to each and every one of my LinkedIn connections the next day. To clarify, government should get out of my yard with regulation. And I just wanted to put that clarification to the statements that were placed in Cleveland.com last time. To Councilman Weisman's remarks regarding how outdated some of our statutes are, or our ordinances are. We are a city who has a blind person's ordinance passed in the 70s, predating the ADA, which requires, in violation, I believe, of the Americans with Disabilities Act, certification before a blind person could enter a public business with an animal. And another portion of our ordinances passed in the 70s, which prohibits all animals without exception for the ADA, irrespective of if that animal is a service animal. We are a city that has specific provisions in our housing ordinance preventing discrimination for members of the lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender communities, but does not extend those protections to employment. Come, live in our city, but you can't work here without the same protections. All to say that yes, I hope that today, Council, with a majority now, Ms. Cameron, welcome, is able to pass this ordinance. However, I hope that this is the beginning of the hard work of revamping the laws of this city to better reflect and be more welcoming to the values that we hold and more welcoming to the people that we would like to have as our neighbors. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Gould.
Susan Delaney, 2603 Edgerton. I have a unique position here in the sense that I also spend 24 hours a day trying to sell this city and bring good citizens to this community. So I have a couple of issues that I would like addressed, and I would like them to be addressed as best as you all can. Number one, I would like full transparency and understanding of the situation of March 26th when the vote was tabled. I've heard this from 3 different socioeconomic groups in this city. So this wasn't a coffee clutch at Starbucks or people standing around after church at Jesu. But I'm trying to understand why when there was a vote on the table, the decision was made to table the vote. That's number one. Could someone explain that to me, please? Because I feel that I need to go out into the community and be able to understand this and to be able to speak to why this happened.
Mr. Weisman, go ahead.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. So because the ordinance was not recommended to council by the Planning Commission, we needed 5 council members to vote yes to approve the ordinance. It became apparent during the meeting that we were only going to have 4 out of the 5, so we chose to table the vote. The thought is that we could allow the vice mayor to show up and participate as a full council to vote. There is nothing underhanded about that.
Did you not know that, though, before you started the vote, that you didn't have the people here?
Well,
We never held a vote.
They had not, the way, this is my interpretation, I'm going to just speak to what I observed, is that they had not been given legal advice about the ramifications of the Planning Commission vote. So in an effort to make sure they were informed as their legal counsel, I made sure they understood that a 2-1 vote by Planning Commission necessitated a supermajority of council to approve. So they were not aware of that at the start of the meeting. That's what I think. I don't know that for sure, but.
Thank you, Mr. Law Director. So I certainly wasn't aware of that at the beginning of the meeting, but to the point about the public meetings with the Sunshine Law, we had not told each other prior to the meeting because we're not supposed to do that, to see how we're going to vote during a meeting. So we didn't know.
That wasn't the question, though.
I understand that. But we showed up at the meeting, and we didn't know until then exactly how everybody was going to vote. But when it became apparent that we didn't have 5 votes, we thought better we should table it and then bring it up when we think we have the votes to pass, which we've done many times in this council before.
Excuse me, I want to make sure I'm understanding what you're saying, because I'm hearing you say something that I don't think you really want to say. I'm hearing you say that you didn't have enough votes for it to pass. Is that what you're saying? And that's why you tabled it?
We needed a supermajority, which was 5 votes. So 4 votes would not have passed, correct. That's exactly what I'm saying, it's what I want to say. So we tabled the vote.
You tabled the vote because you didn't have the votes to pass it.
That's correct. That's not controversial or underhanded in any way. That's what we do as a council.
Did you have enough votes to not pass it?
I'm not sure what you're asking.
It's a matter of semantics. Did you have enough people here to vote on that item at the March 26th meeting?
As the discussion evolved, it became apparent to me and the rest of us.
That's a yes or no.
Okay, this is actually supposed to be a public forum section where you can address the council. As a courtesy, we'll let Mr. Wiseman answer a question, but we're not going to have a back and forth debate here over the semantics of parliamentary procedure or whether or not it's proper to have a full council of 7 people vote on an ordinance. So if you want to continue your statement, please proceed. Mr. Wiseman, if you would stand down at this time.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you.
Okay. Secondly, I still would like clarification on really the explanation of why this is an emergency issue.
That's already addressed.
Now, that has already been addressed. It's so that if it passes, it would go into effect upon signature of the mayor rather than wait for 30 days.
I understand that, Mayor, but I'm trying to get, I want you to understand, I as a citizen and as somebody who supports the city and has been here a long time and trying to sell the city, why this was brought up as an emergency issue to begin with.
So that it could go into effect immediately.
I understand that, but are there not other issues that could be just as pressing or even more pressing?
Certainly, if you look at the agenda, many of the items are going to be on emergency this evening.
As far as this issue on the table right now, how are some of these issues going to be enforced? Is the building department in charge of this? So for instance, where the coops are,
Yeah, yes, Mr. McConville, if you don't mind.
complaints,
The
is it going to
ordinance-
the building department?
The ordinance has setback requirements. If an applicant is to submit their application for a chicken coop to the building department, the building department will review it and either approve the application for a permit or deny it. If they approve it, the applicant will get a special use permit that will remain in place for 1 year, at which time it will lapse and they will have to apply to the Board of Zoning Appeals for a renewal of the permit. That hearing, as a practical matter, gives the Board of Zoning Appeals discretion as to whether they want to renew it or not. If the application is denied at its inception, the applicant would have a right to appeal that denial to the Board of Zoning Appeals.
Are there any provisions for on-site inspections?
There is a requirement that prior to the renewal of a special use permit, that the building commissioner go out to the property and submit a written report to the Board of Zoning Appeals. So that no renewal of a special use permit would occur without building department inspection. As a practical matter, it's my understanding that when the building department gets complaints about a particular property, they send someone out to inspect, but that's an administrative matter and would be handled administratively.
So my question to you is, how taxing is this going to be on a building department that is already taxed and already is behind the gun as far as getting reports out, as far as getting inspections? How is this process going to, you said on an appeal, how is this right out the door going to affect the building department?
Well, the number of possible permits is limited to 25. I don't think it would be, I think it would be disingenuous to say it's not going to have any impact, but there is a limited number of permits. The building department is in the habit of making inspection of properties that are up for special permit renewal. That happens at nearly every Board of Zoning Appeals meeting we have, so sort of part and parcel of what they're doing now.
Would there be a reason why these are not just for owner-occupied homes?
Well, we limited the permitted use to U1. You know, rental parties, persons who rent, tenants, they have rights under law. I don't know that we could enforce something that within a specific zoning classification that allowed a homeowner to do one thing but a tenant not to do it.
Have we looked into that?
Well, I don't believe that would be constitutional. That's my judgment.
And have we looked into acquiring fencing around the properties that are going to have these chicken coops? So will these owners be required to have fences around their property in total?
I don't believe that's a requirement. There is fencing that's required as part of the coop.
Right, but around the yard?
There's no requirement that says that there has to be fencing on all sides of the
Would there be
yard.
something that we might consider so that the neighbors don't have to look at chicken coops?
That's really a question for members of council.
I mean, have the members of council discussed that? Have they thought about it? And what do you think, members of council?
I'd be for that.
I mean, has anybody put that on the table? I'm just wondering about the bulk of the people that do not really want this, and how are we taking care of those people?
Yeah.
I
anybody can talk and answer.
Well, this is your time to talk, ma'am.
No, well, I put a question out there. I'd
Yeah,
like to
I mean,
know.
they're not actually obligated to answer questions. As a courtesy, we are answering some questions, but as far as, a back and forth volley
I'm not
beyond...
asking for a volley, Mr. Mayor. I'm just asking to be able to be out here and be able to sell this city.
Mhm.
I'm getting very frustrated, to tell you the truth. So what I'm asking now is, in this ordinance, are we talking about fencing for the people who are looking at chicken coops?
There's nothing presently in the amended version of the ordinance before the council that includes fencing. Now, if that comes up during the discussion, then it will come up. You've suggested it, and perhaps they will discuss it.
That'd be great. Okay, I think that's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, ma'am.
Mr. Mayor, I believe in the ordinance it refers to the backyard, the rear has to have a fence. I believe it's in there, but only the rear end.
Okay, thank you. Mhm.
Hi, I'm
Yes.
Amy Feldman, 2591 Trademark. I have a question. Why are you going against the planning commission? If it went to them and you have a planning commission, why are you not taking their suggestion?
I think if the planning commission revoted, it would go the other way.
Pardon me?
I believe if the planning commission were to revote, it would go the other way.
I mean, you have all these people here. I
Mhm.
mean,
And I know that there are a lot of people in the room that are speaking against the proposal. There are a lot more people who I've heard from on both sides, by phone, by email, seeing them in the grocery store, and it's not nearly as one-sided there as it seems to be here in the room.
for transparency, is there a way for all of us to get these emails and really have accountability?
Well, a lot of them aren't emails, a lot of them were face-to-face conversations, but if you want to make a public records request, you're welcome to.
Okay, well, I think we should really know. I mean, it seems like it's changing to make it for how you want it to be. I'll say that. You know, I just don't get it.
Okay.
I don't get it. I don't feel like you're representing necessarily the people of the community, your constituents, and I think if we are so close, I think it should go up for a vote before you pass it. Put it on a ballot and put it out to the people.
Okay.
And take into consideration what people are saying about changing the sizes and fairness. I mean, I don't feel I would be fair. It would be fair to me to live with 24 chickens around my house to eat outside, because that's my property, that little property. And I don't think if you lived in my house, you would want that, would you? I'm asking, would you? I know you have a lot and a half, you live right behind me. I know you said you back up to a building or an apartment, so you're never gonna be in the situation I'm in.
Was your house the one that was?
Yes, it's the drawing.
Yeah, several of those houses wouldn't be able to have a chicken coop based upon the setbacks that are presently in the ordinance, so I don't think it would be 24 at any point.
Well, I just would like to say no on chickens.
Thank you.
Good evening, Mary Fox, Meadowbrook. I just have a question or ask that you also consider if the yards, there's no requirement for them to be fenced in, that you also consider homeowners policies, because if the chickens get off the property and maybe attack a small child, would that homeowner then be responsible for the care or for the damage that their chicken may do? Homeowners policy.
I can't speak as to a homeowner's policy, ma'am. You'd have to call your agent.
Well, I know some insurance companies will increase your rate if you do have chickens.
Thank you.
Rooster got me.
Hello, my name's Laura Francis and I live on Meadowbrook, and I've been up here a few times, probably remember, and I've presented some different information and research that I had collected, but tonight I wanted to talk about some of my dreams. I hope to be able to one day provide my family with fresh eggs without supporting commercial agriculture, a practice that I generally find to be outside of my personal code of ethics. And in providing my own food, I hope that I would also gain the peace of mind because I would know the entire life cycle of the egg that I would be eating. I also hope to be able to teach my future children that the origin of an egg is not the refrigerated aisle of the grocery store. That the food that nourishes and sustains us comes from animals and plants that require hard work, a gentle touch, and dedication. I hope that when I come home from a long 12-hour shift at the hospital, where I've spent many hours helping surgeons repair hearts, remove bullets, and fix broken limbs, that I can take comfort in simple pleasures. I want to watch a little flock of hens peck and scratch for worms in the ground and look forward to that perfect egg for breakfast. I have a dream that the City Council will vote tonight, keeping in mind all the facts that have been presented. I hope that the votes will not be made based on personal opinion and stereotypes, and I hope to be able to own chickens in University Heights. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who has not spoken who would wish to address the city? Well, thank you then. Oh,
I'm just finding this really hard to say.
okay, okay.
I have lived here my entire
Could you state your name for the record, please?
Robin Greenwald, 2623 Ashers. I actually bought the house I grew up in. We never had chickens. We don't have goats. We don't have cows. We don't have roosters and ducks, and God knows what else is going to happen here. This is a lovely, beautiful community, small, densely populated. This is not a place for chickens, period. This is the most absurd thing that I've heard University Heights ever propose. And the idea that we don't have a say in this, that you are just going to go ahead and make this ordinance and test the waters and just try this without actually asking our opinions and a vote on this? Do we want this or not? I can't believe that this is America. I find this really intolerable.
Wow.
And I'm kind of astounded and at a loss. At a loss.
Thank you, Ms. Greenwald. Is there anyone else who would care to address the city at this time? Okay, thank you. We'll move on to reports and communications from the mayor and the taking of action. We have a busy agenda this evening, so I will keep this brief and reserve any comments I have for the several agenda items for later as we address them. First thing I'd like to bring up is the Planning Commission. I'm happy to announce the appointment of April Urban to the Planning Commission. April is a research associate at Case Western Reserve University Center on Urban Poverty and Community Development, serves on the executive committee of the National Neighborhood Indicators Partnerships in Washington, D.C. She earned her Master of Science degree from Case Western Reserve University and her Bachelor of Arts degree from State University of New York at Geneseo. April is the co-founder and co-chair of Data Days Cleveland, which will be later this week, April 5th and 6th. Data Days is an annual celebration of open data where participants engage, ideate, and learn around the use of data and technology from a civic lens. Finally, I would add that April and I served together on the board of Future Heights previously, so we already have a history over the last 2 years of working together. April will bring a unique perspective to the Planning Commission given her work in the foreclosure crisis and in her application of analytics. I know Ms. Urban is here in the gallery tonight. If you could just stand up and say hi to everyone, and here's April Urban. So thank you, April.
She was up here.
Coming up, I will be one of the several featured speakers at the Heights Bike Coalition annual meeting. This will be this Sunday, April 8th from 4 to 6 p.m. at the Heights Arts at 2175 Lee Road. Other speakers include Cleveland Heights Planning Director Richard Wong, Shaker Heights Principal Planner and Clavora Heights Bicycle Coalition President Steve Reinhardt, Ohio bicycle lawyer Scott Kuboff, and Canterbury School physical education teacher Julie Lustig. I will be addressing the plans now in place to stripe our first bicycle lanes here in University Heights along the full length of Warrensville Center Road. Tree pruning and tree removal seminar 2 weeks from tonight before the next City Council meeting from 6 p.m. to 7 p.m. here in City Council chambers. You can come and meet and ask questions of the city's arborist and the city's service director. Any questions you may have about caring for your trees, please feel free to come out to that event. We have a rain barrel workshop coming up hosted by the City of University Heights and the Cuyahoga Soil and Water Conservation District on Wednesday, May 23rd from 6:30 to 8 p.m. in the City Service Garage. Registration is required prior to the event, and you can learn more about the workshop and how to register in your upcoming At Your Service newsletter, which we lovingly call the Trash Tribune or the Garbage Gazette, which hopefully by now you get by email as well, so that you can click right on that link and register for that rain barrel workshop. Finally, backyard composting seminars. There'll be several free ones throughout the county through April all the way to August. University Heights will host a seminar here Tuesday, June 5th at 7 p.m. That is presented by the Cuyahoga County Solid Waste District, and again, upcoming newsletter, there'll be a link for how to register. So if you want to take those dates down now, please feel free, and we hope to see you all there. That's all I have for my report tonight. Thanks. So we now move on to the business items on the agenda. First item up is item A, Ordinance 2018-14, amending codified ordinance section 1250.02 of the Planning and Zoning Code entitled Permitted Uses to permit chicken coops in a U1 district upon issuance of a special use permit. This is on second reading and on emergency. Sponsor is Councilman Wiseman. Mr. Wiseman, would you care to take the floor?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you to my colleagues. Thank you to everybody who's come to talk to us tonight. Contrary to what you might think, I appreciate everybody coming here and giving us your opinion. I'd much rather have everybody cheering me and telling me that I have a nice haircut, but I can stand it if that's not the case. So we have been living with this probably for about a year, and I have to apologize to the nice young couple who's coming in favor of this. This is not about one young couple. It's about council getting together and trying to think of something, anything really, that will make us more attractive as a city and move us forward into the century that we are now in. The battle is always the competing interests that we have at stake, but we can't, the rule for council can't be, we'll do every idea unless somebody's opposed to it, because then we would do nothing. In fact, for 30 years, we had a mayor who just really treaded water, and not a lot has changed in this city for the last 40 or 50 years. And I think it's wonderful that all of you have stayed here. But we have taken, I would say, a gargantuan amount of feedback and consideration when crafting this ordinance. And the fact that we're saying we're going to review it in February of next year should tell you how serious we are about your concerns. We're taking almost everything into account except for the refrain that we just shouldn't do it. We're limiting the number of chickens to 4. We're changing the back lot requirement tonight to be 20 feet from any improvement that somebody has in the back of their house. So if you have a patio in the back of your house that touches the rear lot, the chicken coop has to be 20 feet from there. And we're doing the best we can, but there's no perfect legislation. And you just have to adopt it and put as much work into it as you can and go forward with it. We've had almost a dozen meetings on this. It's not like we showed up a month ago and said, hey, let's do chickens. We've been meeting all last year and all last summer about this. There's a lot of almost hysteria surrounding chickens. I'm from West Virginia. I know what a farm smells like. Farms smell really bad, but no one cleans up a farm. no one has a reason to clean up the manure and the other stuff that's going on a farm, and there are a lot of animals on a farm. So I grew up on a farm, and farms stink, so 4 chickens are going to smell really doesn't sway the argument for me, because there's a big difference between someone who has 4 chickens in their backyard and has a reason to take care of them and has us looking over them and the building manager looking over them, and it's not a permanent change. It's every reason in the world for those people to take care of their chickens. Every bit of research we've seen has said chickens aren't as loud as dogs, they don't smell the way you think chickens are going to, and they're really a benefit of the neighborhood. But people still come here and talk about chickens attacking children and people dying from salmonella, and it just, some of it just isn't related to a backyard chicken coop. And I know people are worried, but I think we've rolled into this as many safeguards as we possibly can. We're reviewing it in February, and it is just as easy to say it's a nuisance, we're going to get rid of it. But judging from the debate on both sides of this, I don't think anybody's going to come here in February for the public meeting where you all can come back and grab the microphone again and say, oh, it's, I don't know, I don't know, I can't tell either way. People are going to be either be one way or the other. And I have I'm not having chickens. I don't want chickens. I have a dog. I spend enough time walking my dog. I don't want to be taking care of the chickens too. I showed the same consideration for this couple that I would show to any one of you who came and said to me, I want the city to change for me for X. I would do research, and I would, if I liked the idea and I thought it was good, I would go to my colleagues and I would have meetings, and I think you should expect that of me and anybody else as an elected official. It's not that we don't care about you or we just don't want to hear what you have to say, but we have to move forward as a city. Do I think chickens is going to save us and make us the best city in the world? I can't tell you. I can't tell you, but we're not going to have goats, cows, roosters, and ducks. We just aren't. And I think that's something that people who are opposed to this don't really understand. The idea is to approve this and to see how it works. And we're only letting 25 permits. I don't think we're going to get that many, but I think we need to see, is it 2 people that want it, or is it everybody that wants it? Who knows? The family that showed me the picture of their backyard, I looked, I don't know that anybody's going to be able to have a chicken coop by your yard because the lines are too close. So 20 feet from your patio, 2 of the houses don't even abut your backyard. And the other ones, one of them is a tree next to the garage, so they're out. So but that's sort of what's going on here. You're upset, and well, I'm just upset, and that's just the way it is. And I think that's indicative of this whole debate. When you look at the facts and you look at what's really going on, you see it's really not such the big deal that you think it is. But if it is, we have no intention of making this permanent. That's why we're reviewing it next year in February. We really want to see, is it the greatest thing ever? Is it the worst thing ever? That's something that we're going to see. You know, last week or 2 weeks ago, a PhD in microbiology stood up and said, salmonella, not a concern. And like the next guy got up and said, oh, but no, that's not true. I read salmonella and people are going to die. I mean, I think we need to sort of take a step back and look at this objectively. And I just can't say enough about how my colleagues have been extremely measured in this whole process and have taken every concern that's been brought to them and said, hey, let's change this, let's change this. After I've said, I don't want to change anything else, we've changed a bunch of stuff. But the idea is to keep you, the residents, and your thoughts and wishes in mind. And I would bet nobody here has measured their backyard, and I would also bet almost no one here has actually asked their neighbors if they were planning on having chickens. And I think that's very important, because it's one thing to say, I don't want chickens. It's another thing to actually ask your neighbor, hey, do you want chickens? Maybe it's not even a worry, excuse me. So that's where I am. I'm gonna look at my notes. So we have sought opinions, we have asked opinions, we have listened to your opinion, short of the one that says, don't do this. I think we have listened to about everything that we can. We've limited the number of chickens. There's no roosters. Roosters are the ones that make the noise. There's going to be no roosters. Nobody's going to be killing a chicken. No one's going to be selling an egg or a chicken. And if you're lucky to live next to someone who has chickens, you'll probably get some really good eggs because chickens lay eggs all the time. So that's my spiel about chickens. Like I said 2 weeks ago, I hope my colleagues vote for this. I think as a council, we should be interested in doing whatever we possibly can to make this city a better city and make it more attractive to the people that we want to live here. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Wiseman. Mr. Riddle.
Yes, I would disagree with my colleague. I don't think that having chickens in our yards is going to move our city forward. I don't see how that happens. I think that there's a lot that's wrong with this new law. It is a new law. I just need to focus on one, I think, as an example. This law allows chicken owners to keep buckets of chicken poop within 5 feet of their neighbor's yard. Okay? This is a blatant disregard for the health and safety of our University Heights residents. Okay? And I'll vote against it.
Thank you, Mr. Riddle.
I know.
Mayor.
Yes, Mr. Sims.
I'm also against this legislation, and I made that clear from the very beginning. I don't see value in it, and I certainly don't see it making us a more attractive community or moving the city forward. Don't see that at all. But what I do see is overwhelming opposition to this from the community. And I'm not basing my position on personal opinion or stereotype. And for anybody to suggest that that's how our decisions are made is a little insulting to me. So that's all I really have to say about it. I just don't know why we're even considering this.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Sims. Mr. Rock.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you everybody for coming today and giving us your opinion. It really, the feedback that we heard from our residents did amend a lot of the items here in this ordinance. I can count 12 different amendments to the original ordinance that we had looked at. From the original ordinance, we've amended it 12 times. I'm going to read what some of those are, but before I do, I just want to preface that throughout this entire process, we've maintained that we don't envision a chicken in every yard. I mean, I hope that's not the case, but we want to make this a process in which someone could apply for a special use permit. So this isn't going to say you can go out and buy a chicken tomorrow. You will not be allowed to go out and buy a chicken tomorrow. I'm sorry, you're not. But you are going to have a process now in which you can apply for one through a special use permit. In fact, you really have always been able to do that because when this was written back in 1944, over the last 74 years, if you wanted a backyard chicken in the last 74 years, all you had to do was go to the Board of Zoning Appeals and ask for an appeal, which the family who requested that appeal a year ago did go through that process. So you always could do it. But if the Board of Zoning Appeals approved your request last year, they would have approved your request without any guidance, without any rules on the books, without any scrutiny. It would not be strict at all. It would not give rules on inspections, on noise, on cleanliness, on the quantity of chickens, on the size of your coop, on whether you could have a rooster, because once that appeal through Board of Zoning Appeals is granted, through a special use permit or a variance, there was no other guidance. This was an opportunity for us to take a look at this. And one of the speakers asked why we're each going to support this, and I'll give my reason why. Because you were able to do this, but now there will be rules on the books that make this strict. During those many decades, there hasn't been a lot of interest. There has been now, so here is our opportunity to make this a little more strict. Now, the 12 different amendments to this ordinance that we're reviewing tonight actually makes it more stringent. And now I'm hearing, you know, there's even more because now we're talking about the distance from the structures, neighboring structures. So that's actually 13 now. But number one, maximum of 4 chickens on a property. I mean, when we were originally talking about this, it was 6. We've made it 4, made it even more strict. Under the original ordinance, there was no rule on that. Roosters are not permitted. A facility must be kept in good repair, maintained, and clean in a sanitary condition, free of vermin, obnoxious smells. The facility must not create a nuisance or disturb neighboring residents due to noise, odor, damage, or threats to public health. The coops and cages must be predator-proof. The shelter must be ventilated. It must be clean. The yards must be fenced in. So there was a question about the yards. I did find it in the ordinance, section F in here, that says rear yards must be fenced in. That was something that was added. Slaughtering of chickens is prohibited. The sale of eggs and chickens is prohibited. The applicant must attend a class. A permit fee for the special permit must be paid. There's a renewal. They would have to go to Board of Zoning Appeals every single year. Neighbors would be notified. The building department would conduct inspections on a yearly basis, and at any given time, there'd be no more than 25 permits in the city. So these were things that I said, okay, you could have gotten that appeal, but none of these things would have mattered. You would have been able to do all of these things, but now we are going to be so strict. It might even be painful because now you are going to have to make sure this is in clean repair. Your neighbors, if they do have a complaint, they will come to the city. And if we find that something in here that you're doing against our ordinance, that renewal could go away. If this passes, you may not even qualify. Not everybody's going to qualify. You may not get your special permit renewed. There's always that risk that you're going to have to take. But I just want to maintain that under these 12 conditions, I feel that we are making it a little bit more strict. If it doesn't pass, you could still always go to Board of Zoning Appeals. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Mr. Rock.
Mayor?
Yes, Mrs. Pardee, please.
Thank you. I too want to thank everyone for coming out, especially because you had to come out a second time. I know people, some of you have been coming to a number of meetings for quite some time. I have a confession to make. When this first came before us, because Ms. Francis and Mr. Coughlin were appealing the Board of Zoning Appeals denial, I thought, yeah, chickens. Why would we do this? Who would want chickens? But she came with a presentation, a lot of information, and a lot of facts. And at that moment, I started thinking differently about this because there was strong information and there was factual information. I did watch the video, I'm so glad we're doing this, from 2 weeks ago, so I heard what everyone presented. I've read all the emails, I've followed next door, I've done my own research, I've watched videos, I've seen pros and cons, I've read scientific information on both sides. Clearly, this isn't easy, because if it were cut and dried, we wouldn't have sat through 10 to 15 hours of testimony, and you wouldn't have come out and sat through this, because it would be an easy decision. And I know it is a big deal to those of you who have come out to speak against this. It is a big deal. And I understand, I hear you. But from my time in the building committee meetings, I have been supportive of this because I think that this has been successful elsewhere. I think that my colleagues have done an outstanding job working to listen to the concerns as has been outlined. I won't go through this again, but to make changes in that ordinance, because we are going to review this in February of 2019, and I am not afraid to roll this back and rescind it if it's not working. Because I will walk to any house where there's a chicken coop over the summer, and pay attention to what's going on. Believe me, I'll be there with my nose and my ears sharply poised. Because this has worked in neighboring cities. I don't know how it will work here, that's why we're doing this. But we know it works elsewhere right around us, or these laws wouldn't be on the books. I think what I'm most interested in, actually, to sort of turn a corner is, this is a zoning code change. This council is very strongly in favor of updating our 55-year-old or so zoning code. We've heard about some of these outdated points. Whatever happens going forward, this law will be part of the zoning code that we are going to review comprehensively. We got fairly far down the road a couple of years ago when the process was stopped through a disagreement, and we are all anxious to continue that process and see it through to update the code altogether. And this would be something that we would be anxious to hear from everyone, because that is the code that protects the homes, the businesses, we don't have industry, but parks, our university. That is something that will comprehensively consider all of these points. So our ordinance for hens in this time period, if it passes, will be reviewed in February of 2019, and will also be reviewed along with the zoning code. I also want to say, I don't know if anyone's thought about this, but this is a risk to anyone who takes out a permit, because we've all heard about the investment there is in doing this. There is a monetary investment, and we may tell them in a year, no, we're not going forward. You have to dispose of those chickens and sell that coop. That is a possibility, so there's risk on both sides. I am grateful for all the emails and all the calls and all the work that everyone's done, but there are two sides to this, and I am supportive of giving this a try. So, thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Pardee. Mrs. Weiss.
Thank you. I also want to thank everybody for coming, and I really feel that this is democracy at its best, when people can have conversations with legislators and try to get things done. I have, besides my time on council and before when I was involved in committees and things like that, I have never, this is unprecedented, the amount of time and research was put into this, and I'm not exaggerating. It's literally been a year and a half, and as the other members have said, many, many hours of research have been made, and this is not something that has been taken lightly. And I've also, in terms of next door, emails, speaking to people, there is a majority here that's opposed, but I have to tell you, I've gone out of my way and spoken to my neighbors and people that I've met, like in the grocery store, as the mayor said, and there's a lot of people in favor of it too. And just like Councilman Wiseman, I'm not having chickens, I don't want chickens, but I'm willing to give this pilot program a try and see how it goes.
Thank you, Mrs. Weiss. Mrs. Cameron.
Thank everyone for coming. I want you to know that this has singularly been the star issue for 2017 and 2018, without a doubt. 2016, it was all about trees. This year, it's about chickens. Who knew? But I say to you all that anytime that a decision has come to council that involves a disputed topic, we've taken a lot of time. We've gone out of our way to read the material that's been presented to us, both the pro and con of the issue. And I want you to understand that we do not take anything lightly. We don't read into anything. We do the research as we are expected to do as representatives of the people of this city. And with that being said, I want nobody to come up here and bring us an issue about pot-bellied pigs. Okay, we done on the farm animals thing, okay, hopefully. But I just want to make sure that everybody understands that we are not making any decisions without having done some due diligence, without reading, without considering pro and con. And I have bounced like a rubber ball from the issue back and forth, back and forth. And I can tell you that this is just not an easy thing to do, one way or another.
Mayor, could I just say one more thing?
Yeah, sure, Mrs.
I do
Purdy.
want to echo that, not to belabor this, but it's not easy. It wasn't easy. Don't ever think it was. And if this passes, even in light of all the testimony you've provided, don't think we weren't listening to you, because there is evidence that we were in the changes to the ordinance. And some of us pass sleepless nights because we are trying to figure out for ourselves what we think is the best course of action. So, thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Purdy.
Okay, let's do it.
Okay, if you don't mind, I'd like to say a few words, though. I, too, would like to thank everyone for being here and for making your opinions known. It is important to us. And you know, even though we have the 5-minute rule and the 15-minute rule, we relax those because we want you to know that we are listening and that we are willing to hear you out. I would like to point out that this matter regarding chickens and considering chickens in University Heights is, in many respects, old business, dating well back to a year and a half ago. I was sitting out there where you're sitting back in May when this council heard the BZA appeal. And I know that in the short time I've been in office, I've heard from about 15 households who say they're interested in seeking a permit. We'll see how many of them actually apply and make the investment that's necessary. I know that present in the gallery, the majority seems to be, at least the vocal majority, is against the proposed ordinance. But I would also add that, just taking a quick look here, every email I've received in the last 9 days, and I've received emails on both sides, but in the last 9 days, every email I've received has been in support of the ordinance, taken together with an apology for not being able to be here tonight, that if they were here, they would speak in favor. And I'm on the Planning Commission, and when an earlier version of this ordinance was before the Planning Commission, I did not vote for it. But with the amendments that we have now, many of those amendments, well, essentially all of those amendments being added in consideration of the things that you have said, the concerns that you have raised, and finding ways to balance those concerns against the interests of the people who are also interested in trying this. I'm pleased to be able to say that if this council passes this, I will be happy to sign it. So that's all I have. I know that Mr. McConville had something, a bit of housekeeping with regard to the proposal before us.
Just a couple of items, Mayor, for the benefit of council members and audience members. There were 3 changes made from the last version of the ordinance that you considered at your last meeting. One change was the addition of a 20-foot setback from any outdoor recreational improvement. That's a defined term that includes patios, porches, pools, decks, hot tubs, water features, but is not necessarily limited to those items. In addition, we changed the application process so that applications will be submitted directly to the building department as opposed to the Board of Zoning Appeals. And then lastly, we changed the numbering of the ordinance, which is really just a clerical change because we thought that it fit better into Title 14, which is the building and housing portion of the code. 2 of those changes didn't make their way into a revised 2018-14, which is the ordinance you have before you that relates to the U1 zoning. So in order to be consistent with the regulations you're considering, The references in that ordinance will need to be to the building department in lieu of the Board of Zoning Appeals and to section 1478.251, so that the way that zoning provision will read is that chickens will be a permitted use upon issuance by the building department of a special use permit in keeping with the regulations that you're considering under codified ordinance section 1478.251. So you would need to amend this ordinance to make those changes prior to passage.
Okay. Noting that, is there a motion to amend the portion of the ordinance to change Board of Zoning Appeals to Building Department and to change the cross-referenced ordinance section from 618.25 to 1478.251?
So moved.
Second.
Okay, motion by Mr. Weisman, second by Mrs. Cameron. Do we take a vote on that now?
Yes.
Okay, and
Unless there's
is there
discussion.
discussion on this, Mr. Weisman?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just to be clear, this is the first ordinance we're considering, 2018-14, and the section that we're changing is on, that ordinance amends 1250.02 permitted uses.
Correct.
And then we're looking at section I, which is on page 2 of the ordinance that we've been given.
That's right.
Chickens and chicken coops. And we're changing the area where it says, upon issuance by the building commissioner of a special use permit, subject to the criteria in section
1478.251.
1478.251, which will replace where it now says 618.25.
Correct.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
All right, thank you, Mr. Weisman. Is there any further discussion on the amendment? Ms. Thomas, we take the roll?
Mr. Rock?
Aye.
Mr. Weisman?
Aye.
Mr. Sims?
Aye.
Mrs. Pardee?
Aye.
Mr. Erdl?
Aye.
Mrs. Cameron?
Aye.
Mrs. White?
Aye.
Okay, amendment carries. Okay, is there a motion?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, I'd like to move that we pass ordinance 2018-14, amending codified ordinance section 1250.02 of the Planning and Zoning Code entitled Permitted Uses to permit chicken coops in a U1 district upon issuance of a special use permit.
Okay, there we have a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, motion by Mr. Weisman, second by Mrs. Cameron. Is there any further discussion on the motion? Okay. Now, just for clarification, we don't have to suspend the rules because we've had a second reading.
Correct.
Okay, so this is being considered on emergency, but it doesn't require separate votes. Because of the Planning Commission vote, it does require 5 votes to pass.
That's correct.
Very good. Mrs. Thomas, will you call the roll?
Mr. Rock?
Aye.
Mr. Weisman?
Aye.
Mr. Sims?
Nay.
Mrs. Pardee?
Aye.
Mr. Erdl?
No.
Mrs. Cameron?
Aye.
Mrs. White?
Aye.
Okay, motion passes. Okay, next item on the agenda is,
Is item B the same?
yes, letter B, ordinance 2018-15, enacting codified ordinance section 618.25 entitled Keeping of Chickens. I'm sorry, that is wrong?
Sorry, this is going to be enacted.
Oh, I see. One moment.
1478.
1478.251.
Okay.
And that's the only change.
Okay, so to restate that, ordinance 2018-15, enacting codified ordinance section 1478.251, entitled Keeping of Chickens to establish regulations for the keeping of chickens, and amending codified ordinance sections 618.18, entitled Number of Animals Limited, and 618.20, entitled Proximity of Dwellings, for consistency with the regulations for keeping chickens on second emergency and on emergency. Mr. Weisman.
Yes, Mayor. Do we have to move to change the agenda to reflect that?
Go ahead,
change?
yeah.
That would be a good idea. Just
So I would like to change the agenda item B to read that we're amending section 1478.251 rather than 618.25. I think that's a typo.
yes,
on
that
our
would be.
agenda.
Yes, sorry, I did not catch that. Thank you. Okay, so there's a motion. Is there a second to amend the agenda item accordingly?
Second.
Second by Mrs. Cameron. Is there any discussion? Okay, Mrs. Thomas, will you call the roll?
Mr. Rock?
Aye.
Mr. Wiseman?
Aye.
Mr. Sims?
Aye.
Mrs. Pardee?
Aye.
Mr. Earl?
Aye.
Mrs. Cameron?
Aye.
Mrs. Weiss?
Aye.
Okay, thank you. The agenda is so amended. Mr. Wiseman, if you'd
Yes.
care to proceed.
Yes, Mr. Mayor, I make a motion to pass ordinance 2018-15, enacting codified ordinance section 1478.251, entitled Keeping of Chickens, to establish regulations for the keeping of chickens, and amending codified ordinance section 1478.25, or is that still 618?
Yes, those are still the same.
Amending codified ordinance 618.18 and 618.20 for consistency with the regulations for keeping of chickens, and declaring an emergency.
We have a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Mrs. Cameron, motion made by Mr. Wiseman. Is there any discussion on this motion? If there is no further discussion, Mrs. Thomas, will you call the roll?
Mr. Rock?
Aye.
Mr. Wiseman?
Aye.
Mr. Sims?
Nay.
Mrs. Pardee?
Aye.
Mr. Earl?
No.
Mrs. Cameron?
Aye.
Mrs. Weiss?
Aye.
Okay, motion passes 5-2. Okay, next item on the agenda, letter C, ordinance 2018-19, authorizing the transfer of funds from the General Fund 101 to Funds 601, 201, 401, and 204, and declaring an emergency. Mr. Sheehan, would you address the council on this matter?
Yes, Mayor, this should also include Fund 602. 602 is the Fire Pension Fund. We've amended that, and the law director has an amended copy in front of him. This ordinance is a transfer of general fund money to funds that don't have the revenue sources to maintain a healthy cash balance. So this enables us to replenish those funds with cash so that their ending balance is positive. So I ask that you pass this amendment.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Sheehan.
Do we have to change the pension fund number?
Let's see.
If it's 602 and the ordinance reads 601 for fire pension?
One
Oh,
moment.
okay, so we do need to...
It's in addition to. Is that
I
what-
thought it was, so he needs to clarify that, because I don't know, how could he be in it?
I'm not clear.
Yeah, Mr. Sheehan, could you clarify that, please?
Sure. The copy in front of you has the police and the fire pension funds as both in Fund 601,
Right.
and the fire pension fund is 602.
So we need to make an amendment to this, to make this 602? Or do we?
Yeah, I would recommend making an amendment to the title so that 602 is included, because you're listing, aren't you listing all the funds here?
Yes, with
Yeah.
the fund numbers. So I'm happy to make a motion to include or add the fire pension fund number 602 to the title and change the number under to fund in the body to 602. Is that clear enough?
Yes, I believe so. Is there a second to that motion?
Second.
Okay, second by Mrs. Weiss, motion made by Mrs. Pardee. Any discussion? Okay, Mr.
Thank you,
Wiseman.
Mr. Mayor. The $1.47 million we're transferring is money that we already have. We're just moving to these different funds so the obligations can be taken care of.
Sure, right now, we're just kind of discussing the amendment itself.
Right, but this doesn't, oh, I'm sorry, okay.
Right. Okay.
Okay.
Let's talk about the body of the
Yeah,
motion.
why don't we vote on the amendment, and then we'll
Okay.
address the body of the motion. Okay, if there's no further discussion, Mrs. Thomas, call the roll, please.
Mr. Rock?
Aye.
Mr. Wiseman?
Aye.
Mr. Sims?
Aye.
Mrs. Pardee?
Aye.
Mr. Earl?
Aye.
Mrs. Cameron?
Aye.
Mrs. Weiss?
Aye.
Okay, so amended. Now, main motion. Mr. Wiseman, you were saying?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just want to clarify where the money's coming from. We're transferring from the general fund $1.47 million.
That is
This money that was already in the budget for 2018, and we're just moving it around to the different funds for the obligations we have to take care of.
correct.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
So I move approval of Ordinance 2018-19, authorizing the transfer of funds from the General Fund 101 to Fund 601, 602, 201, 401, and 204, and declaring an emergency.
Okay, we have a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, motion by Mrs. Pardee, second by Mrs. Cameron. Is there any discussion on the motion? Okay, seeing none, we'll take 2 votes first on the suspension of the rules.
Mr. Rock?
Aye.
Mr. Wiseman?
Aye.
Mr. Sims?
Aye.
Mrs. Pardee?
Aye.
Mr. Earl?
Aye.
Mrs. Cameron?
Aye.
Mrs. Weiss?
Aye.
Okay, and on the main motion?
Mr. Rock?
Aye.
Mr. Wiseman?
Aye.
Mr. Sims?
Aye.
Mrs. Pardee?
Aye.
Mrs. Cameron?
Mr. Earl?
Mr. Earl?
Aye.
Mrs. Cameron?
Aye.
Mrs. Weiss?
Aye.
Okay, motion carries. Next item on the agenda is Ordinance 2018-20, amending codified ordinance section 1280.10, entitled Rental of 1 and 2 Family Dwelling Units in U1 and U2 districts for the purpose of regulating rental properties on first reading. Mr. Grogan-Myers, would you please come to the podium and address this point?
Good evening, Council. As you may or may not be aware, my job is changing, as evidenced by a later agenda item. But my job is tasked to be more focused on maintaining and strengthening the city's housing stock, and also increasing or decreasing the tax delinquency here in the city. Now, thankfully, we're blessed with a lower tax delinquency rate. But one of the tools that we're lacking that several other cities here in the county have relates to rental registrations and tax delinquencies. So the ordinance before you tonight has to do with if you want to be a rental here in the city, you must either have paid your property taxes and maintain paying those property taxes, or be in a payment plan, which is something that the county allows. So some of the data that is presented in my memo here actually comes from some of the work that Ms. Urban does with NST, and so the data you see here was pulled earlier in March as it relates to tax delinquencies here in the city. So according to the data, we have 132 parcels that were certified tax delinquent here in the city. I actually found that there was one parcel that was already had paid up, so we were down to 131. Stripping away the commercial properties, we are left with 89 residential certified tax delinquent parcels, and 20 of those are, when compared against our rental registration list, are rentals here in the city. When you go from there, 4 of those are on payment plans, and I also found that one of those has, since I wrote this memo, actually become current in their property taxes. So that leaves us with 15 properties where people are making money off their property through rentals, but not paying completely their property tax obligation. So what this ordinance would allow us to do, allow the building department to do, is incorporate that element as part of the rental registration application and the maintenance of good standing for that permit, or for that allowance for you to maintain a rental in your home. Brief overview.
Very good. Thank you, Mr. Grogan-Myers. Mrs. Weiss.
Thank you. So in the past, this has never been analyzed or dealt with at all?
Here in the city?
Mm-hmm.
No. I should say not to my knowledge, in the 3 years plus I've been here.
Very good. Mr. Sims?
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Patrick. The 15 homes that remain, I guess, let's say, in jeopardy, if we were to enact this legislation, what would happen?
So it would trigger a notification from the building department that should they not come current or enroll in a budget payment plan, they would lose their rental registration license or permit here in the city. We had a meeting with community development, housing, building people several weeks ago in the first suburbs down in Cuyahoga County with some Cuyahoga County officials, and the response we heard back from county officials was they had businesses either when some cities enacted this ordinance, this type of ordinance, or when they turned their home from privately owned into a rental, owners were showing up with $20,000 checks just to maintain good standing. So it wouldn't be without an opportunity for those properties to remedy their delinquent property taxes. But as of yet, I just looked through the numbers late last week. These 15 properties, according to the NST database, comprise about $98,600 in certified delinquent property taxes. And when you take into account the current property taxes, which are not yet certified, but just show up on the county's database as being delinquent, that number has now risen to about $129,000. So this is an ongoing problem. This is not something that represents a snapshot in time, but something that is still ongoing in these properties. And that's money that affects our public education here in the city.
So we would disallow these properties from being rented any further, and how do we do that? How do we police this? I mean, I'm just trying to understand what will be the execution? How will it work?
So in terms of what this ordinance would allow is a revocation of the rental permit or rental license, which means in terms of the housing, it would be allowed to be followed up in housing court.
Okay.
Were they not to meet that requirement.
So we can take them to court.
That's correct. And I can speak from firsthand experience in having represented a community that enacted a very similar provision, that the response was fairly immediate from landlords when they learned that their rental registration permit was not going to be renewed. There were large checks cut and people either coming current on their taxes or entering into payment plans with the county. We haven't actually had to go to the lengths of seeking injunctive relief. We've had good outcomes either in housing court or through landlords, deciding to come current.
Thank you, Mr. McConville.
I've got a question.
Mr. Riddle, please.
Yes, you mentioned that University Heights has a somewhat lower rate. Can you give me an idea, put that into perspective?
I don't have the numbers in front of me, but what I will say is, at least anecdotally, talking with my colleagues in other cities, we fare pretty well both in terms of commercial delinquency and residential delinquency property taxes. I can't give you hard numbers at this moment, but.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you. Mr. Weisman.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just looking at the penalty section of this possibly up-to-date version of the code, 1280.10 subsection G, penalty, whoever violates the provision of this section is guilty of misdemeanor in the first degree, shall be fined not more than $1,000 for 6 months, both for each offense. A separate offense shall be deemed committed each day during which a violation occurs. So, by my estimation, once somebody is in violation of the statute, there's a fine structure in place that where a prosecutor can say, look, you can't be fined $1,000 a day and go to jail. That's the stick that we have to get them to actually pay. Answers Mr. Sim's question about, so what if they don't do this? So this is what it is. It gives our prosecutor the ability to go after them and force them to pay with real penalties.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Weisman. Mrs. Purdy.
Thank you. I just want to say this is great work. Thank you for bringing this forward. This is the kind of ordinance we've been looking for. This is the kind of protection we'd like to have for our city to strengthen the housing stock and our residential situation. So thank you.
Yes. Very good. Thank you. Anyone else? Okay.
I just have one.
Oh, sure, Mr.
additional
McConville.
comment, which
Okay.
is in answer to the gentleman's question. This is the only change that's being contemplated through this ordinance with respect to 128010 is the change that would allow the city to deny rental registration permits to folks who aren't current in their real estate taxes. My understanding is that 128010 is going to be considered more holistically with respect to the other provisions you may be interested in committee, and then presumably would come back up for consideration before council.
Thank you for the clarification, Mr. McConville. Mrs. Cameron.
Yes. wanted to know, young man, what is, as far as the commercial properties, you have not provided a dollar amount so much for those folks. Is it that the group of people, the large lion's share of people in that group, have they begun to make arrangements, or?
In the commercial
Yes.
area? So within the memo, you'll see that roughly 34,800,000 in delinquent taxes for commercial for 11 parcels. What that, a lot of that really translates to is University Square, unfortunately.
I see.
Since then, I've also sent out letters to the other delinquent parcels, letting them know if they're not aware, which we've come across scenarios where addresses are incorrect in the county system. We want to give people the benefit of the doubt. We're not trying to be mean, but we're trying to raise awareness of potentially an issue. So I've sent letters to homes and said, so you're aware, your property is tax delinquent, and you could have a tax lien sold on your property. If you weren't aware of this, please contact the county. Here's how. Please enroll in a budget payment plan. In one specific scenario with a commercial property, they weren't aware because it's multiple parcels for the same business, and they're in the process of getting a check out.
Oh,
that would be about
great.
$77,000.
Yes.
Oh, yeah, that's nice.
It's nice to be able to write a check for $77,000 too.
That's real good.
Yes.
That must be one of them eating
In many
establishments.
cases, it's a lack of awareness, but in my estimation, we also need the stick. We need to be able to tell people, this is what happens when you don't pay your property taxes and you own a rental here in the city. We expect you to maintain the same standards as an owner-occupied house when it comes to property taxes.
Okay, very good. Does anybody have anything else? Well, I'd just like to say, Mr. Grogan-Myers, this is strong work. Thank you for bringing this to the council, and happy to have had this on first reading, and it'll be back on the agenda in 2 weeks.
Thank you.
Next item on the agenda is Ordinance 2018-21, enacting codified ordinance Chapter 262, entitled Economic Development Director, and declaring an emergency. Yes. And it's introduced by Mayor Michael Dillon Brennan, so I'll speak to this. At the special meeting a week ago, we established an economic development department and funded it with the idea that we would have an economic development director. It's upon advice of the law director. This is a position that requires an ordinance that enacts and enables that position. So the ordinance that is before us sets forth the establishment of the Economic Development Director and goes over some of those duties. Simply for the benefit of everyone here, I'll just read that there is hereby established the position of City Economic Development Director. The Economic Development Director will be responsible for the co-development, planning, implementation, and coordination of the city's economic development program and the economic development portions of the master plan. This will require working on business retention, business attraction, expansion, and redevelopment. There will be a special emphasis on the city's existing economic districts, and especially University Square, Cedar Taylor, and Cedar Center. There will be further special emphasis on working as a team with community development and the mayor in helping realize the vision of expanded districts and targeting areas for redevelopment. The Economic Development Director will participate in community planning, economic development policies and tools, land use controls, zoning, and will work with developers, elected and appointed officials, merchants, and the general public. And then by way of appointment, the mayor shall appoint the City Economic Development Director. So that is the long and short of it, together with the emergency language that will allow us to begin to advertise the position, take applications, go through an interview process, and get the Economic Development Department of the City of University Heights underway. So, is there any discussion?
I have a question.
Yeah, sure, Mr. Sims.
I'm fully in support of this, but I do know that we are modifying a chapter of our code. So I'm wondering if it's appropriate to sort of memorialize through this areas by name, like University Square, Cedar Taylor, and Cedar Center. And if it wouldn't be more appropriate just to put a period after special interest on the city's existing economic districts, and then start again with there will be further emphasis on working whatever. I don't know. University Square may not be there forever.
Sure.
Cedar and Taylor may not always be an important focus, and Cedar Center could even go away.
Certainly, I suppose that over time they could become known as different things and the emphasis could shift. I would have no objection to turning that comma after economic districts to a period and simply striking the rest of that sentence.
That would be my recommendation.
Okay. Well, is there a motion? To amend. I think we'll need a motion to amend.
So I would move that we amend the proposed ordinance, the part related to 262.01, establish duties to delete the language relating to University Square, Cedar Taylor, and Cedar Center.
Okay, so there is a motion to amend proposed 262.01 to strike and especially University Square, comma, Cedar Taylor, comma, and Cedar Center, and to put the period after existing economic districts. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Mr. Weisman. Is there any discussion on the amendment? Very good. Mrs. Thomas, will you call the roll on the amendment?
Mr. Rock?
Aye.
Mr. Wiseman?
Aye.
Mr. Sims?
Aye.
Mrs. Pardee?
Aye.
Mr. Erdl?
Aye.
Mrs. Cameron? Aye. Mrs. Weiss?
Aye.
Okay, the amendment passes. Is there a motion or further discussion?
Move for passage.
Okay, there is
Is that a question?
The question is, are you asking for a motion?
oh, sure, yes, we'll accept a motion for passage of the
Okay, then
ordinance.
I would move passage of an ordinance enacting the codified ordinance, chapter 262, entitled Economic Development Director, and declaring an emergency.
Very good. We have a motion by Mr. Sims to pass the ordinance 2018-21. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Mr. Wiseman. Is there any discussion on this motion? Seeing none. Mrs. Thomas.
On suspension.
Oh, excuse me. First, on suspension.
Mr. Rock?
Aye.
Mr. Wiseman?
Aye.
Mr. Sims?
Aye.
Mrs. Pardee?
Aye.
Mr. Erdl?
Aye.
Mrs. Cameron?
Aye.
Mrs. Weiss?
Aye.
Okay, and then on the main motion.
Mr. Rock?
Aye.
Mr. Wiseman?
Aye.
Mr. Sims?
Aye.
Mrs. Pardee?
Aye.
Mr. Erdl?
Aye.
Mrs. Cameron?
Aye.
Mrs. Weiss?
Aye.
Okay, motion passes. Excuse me, ordinance passes. Okay, next item on the agenda is Resolution 2018-22, supporting the School District Board of Education's resolution rejecting House Bill 512 and declaring an emergency. I had a meeting with the superintendent, Dr. Talisa Dixon, and with the city manager of Cleveland Heights, Tanisha Briley. The meeting was the same day that the agenda was to be submitted to the council. It was this past Wednesday. So my apologies if I got a little ahead of myself with the council by not discussing with you individually my intention to put this resolution before you. I can say that the resolution is one that the school board, the CHUH school board, has asked the city councils of University Heights and Cleveland Heights to consider based upon their own resolution that they passed last month, calling on the Ohio General Assembly to reject House Bill 512. So basically, House Bill 512 would transfer most of the powers of the elected State Board of Education and Department of Education to a governor-appointed cabinet agency. And the school board suggests, and I would also happen to agree, that this would decrease accountability and transparency concerning public education in the state of Ohio, that we should, as voters, be able to continue to elect our state school board and have them act in that capacity than to have any governor, be it the present governor or a future one, appoint a cabinet-level person to handle those responsibilities instead. So it is when Dr. Dixon and City Manager Briley asked if we would consider this, I saw that as I thought that would be a good thing for us to consider, and I asked that it be placed on the agenda. So I hope that you will consider it, and I'd like to see us pass it, but I know that there may be differences of opinion with regard to this House bill. I do know that there are people on both sides of the aisle who are troubled by House Bill 512, and it is foreseeable that a governor of either party could appoint someone who would not necessarily be representative of the state at large. So, Mrs. Weiss.
Thank you, Mayor. So in terms of the House bill, I happen to agree. I think that the school board should be elected, the state school board. I'm not sure, though, I know that Dr. Dixon asked the city to, propose this resolution. I personally don't feel that the city should even have any of these, and the next one that's coming up also, the resolution even on our agenda. I think we should be separate. That's just my opinion.
Okay. Thank you, Mrs. Weiss. Does anybody else have anything they'd care to add?
I have a question. I do support this resolution. I'm a school board employee. I don't believe there's any problem with me voting. There's no conflict.
I would agree with that.
Okay, I just wanted to clarify. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Are there any further comments? Is there a motion?
I would move that we adopt a resolution supporting the School District Board of Education's resolution rejecting the House Bill 512 and declaring an emergency.
Okay. We have a motion by Mr. Sims. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Mr. Rock. Any further discussion? Mrs. Thomas, we call the roll on the motion. First on the suspension of the rules.
Mr. Rock?
Aye.
Mr. Weisman?
Aye.
Mr. Sims?
Aye.
Mrs. Pardee?
Aye.
Mr. Earl?
Aye.
Mrs. Weiss?
Aye.
And then on the main motion. Oh, well, let the record reflect that. Okay. No, yes, I suppose it'll be a pass
I
then.
mean, she's left, for all we know, she has decided to go home, so she's not present for the vote, but the vote passes.
Just for the record,
Yeah, her code is still there.
I believe she stepped out for a second to.
I'm not trying to be facetious.
No, I understand, but I want to be clear. Her phone's here. I think she's coming back, but she's obviously not here for the vote, so I think.
Okay.
It sounds like she passes to me.
Right, I mean, it will carry regardless, so. Yeah, that sounds appropriate. Okay, so then on the main motion.
Mr. Rock?
Aye.
Mr. Weisman?
Aye.
Mr. Sims?
Aye.
Mrs. Pardee?
Aye.
Mr. Earl?
Aye.
Mrs. Weiss?
Yes.
Okay.
I have a question, Mr. Mayor.
Yes, Mr. Wiseman.
Maybe this is for the law director. If it's just a resolution, we're not contracted or anything, do we really need to suspend the rules, or is it just?
No, you really don't.
Oh.
You really don't.
Perhaps the school board wanted this immediately.
Even so, our charter indicates that resolutions that don't have the effect of law require a 2/3 vote of council, not a suspension of rules.
Okay.
Okay. We have 2/3, I think. Okay, thanks.
Elvis is back in the building, ladies and gentlemen.
Okay. All right. Next item on the agenda is resolution number 2018-23, urging the state and the Ohio Department of Education to revise the existing system of ranking schools and declaring an emergency. This is in a similar vein, a similar story, based upon my meeting with Dr. Dixon and with Cleveland Heights City Manager Tanisha Briley, that again, the school board has asked that both the Cleveland Heights city government, the University Heights city government, the two cities that are serviced by the CHUH school district, consider this particular resolution as well, asking that the state and Ohio Department of Education revise the existing system of ranking schools and districts to a new system which more accurately measures how well public schools are fulfilling their primary role of developing productive citizens. I don't believe there's anything here that suggests that the school board is asking that they not be ranked or rated or evaluated per se, as much as they're asking for a better system than the one we have now. And I believe that the system we have now does not fully or accurately measure the both the relative values, positive and negative, and you know, strengths and weaknesses of our public school district. So I would urge passage, but understand again that there may be a diversity of opinion on this, and ask that you give it your consideration.
And Mayor,
Mrs. Purdy.
if I may comment, in the middle of Section 1, it's spelled out very clearly that part of this resolution involves requesting the ODE to formulate a process that involves parents, school board members, civic leaders, school administrators, and other school patrons, in other words, stakeholders, in the development of this system. I will tell you that the federal government requires school districts to include all those stakeholders when developing a plan for use of federal funds. So I think it's quite proper, as well as just reasonable, to involve stakeholders in developing this method of accountability. So I wanted to point out that that is a big part of this, too.
Okay. Thank you, Mrs. Purdy. Mrs. Weiss.
Thank you. So again, I don't think that we should be voting on a resolution dealing with the school board. You know, this is a very contentious issue. Ranking, in theory, is supposed to assist low income and eliminate discrimination. And we happen to live in a failing school district. That's some of the schools in the Cleveland Heights, University Heights system are failing, unfortunately, and I don't think anybody wants to live in a failing school district. I'm not sure if the ranking with Cleveland Heights, University Heights is the issue. I think there might be some other issues, and that's that whole other side of the story. There are very few districts in Cuyahoga County that are actually failing. So this is, again, a very contentious issue, and I mean, you could have meetings upon meetings just about, you know, as Councilwoman Pardee mentioned, in terms of ranking with different stakeholders, and I don't think this is a quick, I don't want to say uninformed, but, you know, not thoroughly vetted resolution.
And if I may, I have to say one more thing, and then I don't want to get into a back and forth about the school district, but it's that kind of language that it's a failing school district, but based on a set of numbers, based on a specific test, that is the problem that many in education are seeking, and that's nationwide, are seeking to ameliorate. So I don't think this is a time for a school discussion, but that's the kind of language this kind of resolution seeks to and perception, perhaps, to work with or amend.
Okay. Thank you, Mrs. Pardee.
Oh, here we go.
Mr. Rock.
I just have one comment. When we were out campaigning, one thing I heard from residents on why they would leave the city of University Heights was because of the school district, and it's really disheartening because I think we have a wonderful school district. I toured the new high school, it's wonderful, and unfortunately our test scores do not rank on par, and I think having a more fair system to rank the schools is necessary. I think it would help retain our population here in University Heights. I saw a staggering statistic that was like 46 to 48% of our students in the city go to private schools, and oftentimes it's our better performing students that go to private schools, and to ensure that we have the better performing students even in our public school system, we have to make sure we have a fair system that judges them across the board fairly. So I support this.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Rock. Mr. Wiseman, okay. Mr. Riddle,
Yes, I'd just like to say, I'd like to throw my 2 cents in and say that it's not just about performance, it's about performance and the cost. I hear the same thing, I've been hearing it for years, that if there's one thing that would cause me to move, it would be the schools, and it's not just the underperforming schools, it's the cost of the schools. We have one of the highest millage rates in the state of Ohio. And a lot of people don't think we're getting a bang for our money, so bang for our buck. So I just thought I'd throw that out there.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Erdl.
So I just have a question. I
Okay,
think
Mr.
the
Sims.
question may be a comment, but under whatever revised system that might be implemented, is it to rank the school district based on academic performance, or just based on a more global set of criteria? And if it was based on a more global set of criteria, wouldn't we still have the academic issue to?
I'm sure, but
contend
we
with?
don't know what it would be. This isn't specific about it, it's just calling for a different system to be worked out. But I would never expect academics to not be part of it. Because
So
that's what school's all about.
We could be let's just say we could be a high-performing overall school district with a medium-performing academic performance. Is that a possible outcome? I don't really understand this much myself.
Well, I think some of it is that it involves stakeholders to help develop some of the very same things you're talking about. And, I think the thing that we would not want to see, and I don't believe an outcome involving these stakeholders would result in, is we don't want to whitewash the problems that the school district is having, but we do want to be able to address them in a reasonable way and note their progress and, if you will, perhaps even reward progress. But what I would not want to see is a system where things are not addressed and aren't even acknowledged. But I don't believe this resolution calls for that.
I think there's a group of superintendents and other people interested in the public good who are trying again to lobby the state. And this is just a part of that, but that's just my understanding. I would say if there are questions and anyone wants to learn more about basically the report card and the various measures on the report card, I think a 1-hour meeting with members of the board or someone over at the district would be easily created to answer all those questions. What it looks like now, what it could look like in the future, even what House Bill 512 might mean, because that's the kind of thing we might get questions about from residents. We do get questions about academics, so maybe instead of talking now with me as the only representative, and I'm not in that arena, setting up another meeting, if there's interest, would make a lot of sense.
Okay. Thank you, Mrs. Purdy.
So my final question is, with regard to who this resolution would be sent to directly if it was passed, is it limited to this group of people because, well, the governor is logical, the House Speaker, I guess, is logical, then, Senator Williams and State Representative Boyd are representative of our district, but it just seems like the people that we really want to know that we have a concern won't even ever see this. It has to go beyond that.
Is the school superintendent, the state superintendent, a part of it?
The Department of Education Board President is listed here.
The state superintendent is not named in this. But I assume this was provided by the school board.
Yes, this was proposed language by them. That doesn't mean that we couldn't, work on it.
Add
Yes.
some things.
Yes. Mrs. Weiss, you've been patient.
Thank you. So just because this is a very complex issue, even more so, I don't think that the city should be voting on it. And and the way that I vote is not because I don't want the school district to succeed, and I probably do think that the ranking needs to be changed, but I'm voting on it because I don't think we should be voting on it.
Understood. Thank you, Mrs. Weiss. Mrs. Cameron.
Yes, is this plan to request the ranking, is this part of a larger series of efforts that they're making to make improvements? Or is this just this is what they see as their main problem, and this is what they want to do?
Well, I think they could better answer that for themselves, but it is my belief and certainly my hope that they aren't simply asking that the ranking system be changed, they are also working on the underlying issues as well.
Did they share what they felt the underlying issues were?
In the brief meeting we had, we didn't get into all those complexities.
Okay.
Do we have a motion in a second? Oh.
Yeah, we don't actually have a motion on the floor at this point. Is there a motion? And for the record, Mr. Ertl just spotted the sugar.
Mayor, I would like to make a motion to urge the state and the Ohio Department of Education to revise the existing system of ranking schools and declaring it an emergency.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion by Mr. Rock, a second by Mr. Sims. Is there any further discussion? Seeing none, Mrs. Thomas, will you call the roll on, well, do we need just a single vote? Will you call the roll, please?
Mr. Rock?
Aye.
Mr. Wiseman? Aye. Mr. Sims?
Aye.
Mr. Kirby?
Aye.
Mr. Earl?
Aye.
Mrs. Cameron?
Aye.
Mrs. Weiss?
Nay.
Thank you. Next item on the agenda is item H, motion to authorize mayor to seek demolition funding for 3654 Raymont Boulevard. I would note a companion item, item I, motion to authorize mayor to seek demolition funding for 3673 Washington Boulevard. So, Mr. Grogan Myers, if you could address items H and I on the agenda, please.
Thank you, Mayor. I guess first, let me start globally and then we'll work to the specifics of each property. The first is that the reason we're asking for the demolition funding is because the application period is open. It closes April 13th, which means at least it's not been announced that there's another round of demo funding this year. So there's a set of funds available right now to potentially demolish these two homes. However, in 2015, when we came before you and declared properties public nuisances, we submitted 6 homes to the county for demolition funding. One was taken off by the county, and only 2 of those homes were actually demolished using the funding, 3505 Homer and 3509 Raymond. One home was demolished privately, and the other 2 are still standing and have since had people investing in the homes. So the intention of requesting this demo funding, the authorization to ask for this demo funding, is not necessarily to demolish these homes, because obviously if we can save the homes, that's what we want to do. But the intention is also not to miss an opportunity. And between now and the application closing, there's not another council meeting. So, and I wouldn't want to call you back for a special meeting for this. So the request is to seek authorization, understanding that the administration will continue to work to find ways for us to be able to save these homes from demolition. Actually, the reason why one of the homes stands out, the 2 that were not demolished, one of them was evaluated by the county land bank.
That's what I was wondering.
And is currently being rehabbed. It's 3478 Raymond. So when these homes are recommended for demo, when we submit the application, we have partnered with the county land bank to be our agent. So if the homes are demoed, the county land bank would be the one to demolish the home. But first, they review the properties and they evaluate them for their current conditions. And in a similar manner to how we went through using the administrative county land bank official who said they really look at the mechanics, the mechanicals, the furnace, the plumbing, things of that nature, and then also the foundation. So we tried to do the same when we went through the property and have since provided the pictures enclosed in the document that you have before you tonight. So certainly understanding that we may not look at things the same way the county land bank does, but they will be performing their own inspection probably. Should you approve this, and should we then be awarded funding? So I want to make it clear that we're asking for authorization to submit for demolition funding. That is not necessarily the outcome of the application and the potential award for funding.
Thank you, Mr. Grogan-Myers. Mr. Riddle.
I hate to raise this issue again, but, and this is no reflection of you, what's the difference between their land bank and our land bank?
Funding instead.
They pay for it.
Currently, again, as kind of a modification of my job duties, I oversee the land bank. And I will tell you that as great as I think I am, I don't have the skills and the time and the experience that the county land bank has. They're known nationally for the work they do and the work they have done. So at the end of the day, they've got a team of construction and contractors and whatnot who go through these properties because it is their job. They know what they're looking for. They know what the warning signs are. I'm looking at a home and I'm saying, gosh, that looks like a lot of work. Maybe it's not worth it. And then someone could come in, the county land bank could come in and plop down the $70,000 it requires to rehab the home.
Okay.
So we went through to provide you with the evidence we're looking at, to understand what are the current conditions we're seeing. But at the end of the day, the determination is left with the county land bank because that's their expertise.
Okay. So what was ours when we set ours up?
I'm sorry?
What was our expertise when we set ours up? And what was the purpose of ours? Was this a shortcut or?
No, so part of what we wanted to do was to be able to actually locally manage some of the vacant and unproductive land here in the city. So that brings with it various amounts of ways that we can take in land through estate forfeiture sale, through tax foreclosures and whatnot. We have a way to get property first, or have a potential.
Yeah, it allows us to acquire properties in our land bank, which then gives us a little more flexibility in terms of either repurposing them or selling them. So that we can either assemble land or turn it around for development.
Talking about land banking?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
Yes, Mrs. Purdy.
Thank you for the overview. That was very helpful and probably helped some of the questions that might otherwise have come from us. Understanding that the land bank, with its experts, goes through and makes a decision, demolition or potential rehab. Nothing is ever demolished in this city before it comes back to council for a vote on demolishing anyway, correct?
It would be a demolition permit. Is that correct? So
But we vote on,
Yeah.
we vote on anything that's taken down in this city,
Yes.
correct? Did we change that?
Yes, we did.
We have an ordinance on the books. It's in Title 12. It allows an applicant to apply to the building department for a demo permit, and if the property falls into one of the four categories, then it would be, then a permit would be issued. The building commissioner would have the authority to issue the permit. We looked at that ordinance in connection with the Murphy House. But yeah, that's my understanding.
And one of those four, or maybe it's even 6 conditions, is you have to meet at least one of them, if memory serves me. And one
Correct.
of those is that it's been declared a public nuisance. And these properties were declared public nuisances, I believe it was February 19th. Now, again,
There are 4 factors under that ordinance. Can I have that book? And the way the ordinance is worded, if any one of the 4 conditions is met, then the building department is to issue a permit.
So it does not come back to council?
Yes, it does.
I was under the impression that everything came back to council, so we would know. We would just know what the outcome was.
If memory serves, we did come back to council for the 2 homes that were demolished using the demolition funding. It was declared a public nuisance when we asked for permission to go to council, or to go out for the funds. Again, at least it's always been my philosophy to never demolish a home that we can't reasonably try to save, whether it's trying to get a private contractor in the county land bank themselves.
Bless you.
So if memory serves, we did not come back to council.
Yes, we did.
I think we did.
I'm pretty sure we did.
Thank you.
Okay.
Well, we're going to find out.
Thank you, Mr. Rogemeyers. Mr. Sims?
First of all, I think everyone on this council knows that I'm opposed to demolition unless it's absolutely, totally necessary. I've had an opportunity to speak to several individuals who are with local development corps, primarily in the city of Cleveland and on the west side. And they are more than willing to talk to us about the approaches that they use to create interest in homes that may even seem like they are beyond repair, to encourage the redevelopment of those properties. So I'll pass that information on to you, and I hope that we would take advantage of it. But for me and your request, I was on board with it because I was under the impression that at the end of the day, it would still be something that council would have a say on. But now, I'm being left with the impression that if we are granted the demolition funding and the county land bank comes to a conclusion, then we will proceed with their conclusion. So I'm not sure that I support that approach.
Well, and so there's 2 reasons that 2 things that I consider when I was making this request or writing this memo. The first is that these homes are across the street and 4 doors down from each other. So we've got 2 public nuisance homes that are impacting the property values. Not even in one neighborhood, kitty corner from each other. And even worse, when we were out executing the administrative warrant or serving the administrative warrant, across the street was a realtor's open house.
Yes.
Now we were fortunate enough to learn, the mayor and the prosecutor stopped over. We were fortunate enough to learn that there was a very solid offer on the home. So I'm inclined to believe that the homes will not be demolished. I'm inclined to believe based on what we saw here.
So I have the ordinance and can provide some further clarification. It's 1242.14, demolition permit required. No building or structure shall be wholly or partially demolished unless the building commissioner has issued a demolition permit in accordance with these regulations. All demolition shall comply with applicable requirements of the Ohio Building Code. Subsection B, no demolition permit shall be issued unless one or more of the following requirements are met. And then the 4th requirement is the city council determines that the structure or building is a safety hazard or public nuisance. So it's the public nuisance requirement, it's the public nuisance declaration that triggers the building department's ability to issue that permit.
So in effect, we've already made our determination.
Correct.
By declaring the properties public nuisances.
Correct.
And I guess the other thing I would add, Councilman Sims, is that we cannot, as a city, just advertise the home as being a rehab home, because we don't own the home. And in particular, one of the homes, at least on its face, has clouded title. And the way to clear those titles is to go through the county land bank, which I know you're aware of. So it's, I completely agree with you that, yes, we want to maintain good relationship with contractors to save these homes. There's so many homes in University Heights really just need love and attention from a good contractor who knows what they're doing. But but the issue stands that we don't own the home. And so that's part of why using this process is beneficial, because the county land bank can also clean up the home and clean up the title.
So presuming that you had the staff and the resources that you needed, and we could acquire this through the city land bank, will we still have the same options to make a determination about whether we wanted to? I mean, let's say I guess what I'm really asking is, could we gain ownership of the property through our land bank? And if we did, would we be able to better control what happens with the outcome of that property? We could sell it for $1, we could sell it for $100. A property that might take $100,000 to improve, if somebody could pick it up for a single dollar or $100, they might be willing to invest the $100,000. But more importantly, what that would do is put a property in this community that had $100,000 value, minimum. So those are the concerns that I have when I ask these questions about, do we really want to tear down properties, and is that really preserving the economic base of the community? That's really my concern.
Absolutely.
And then finally, Mayor, we don't, if we continue to pursue this approach, then we need some type of infield strategy. I mean, we can't just tear down properties and have a bunch of vacant lots.
And
I agree.
to follow up with that, part of what I've been doing over the past couple months is taking stock of the vacant lots that we as a city and now as a city land bank currently own, or anticipate we may take possession of for that very reason. Because you're absolutely right. I mean, at the end of the day, if you demolish too many homes, it begins to look like a gap tooth smile. It's missing a lot of teeth and it looks kind of funny. But the better approach, and you're absolutely right, is to try to stave these things off before they get to this point. But unfortunately, these homes are where they are now.
Mr. McConville, could you speak to this point?
A couple comments to try to flesh a couple of your questions out. One is that there can be mechanisms for a city to acquire the title to the property if, for example, we have a lien on the property. So I don't know if we've done any maintenance, grass cutting, those kinds of lien-inducing services, but if we ever acquire a lien on the property, then we have the right under the Ohio Revised Code to bring a lawsuit to foreclose on that lien, and can end up with title to the property through that process. Also, it's important to note that when the land bank acquires title to the property, they're typically acquiring title to the property either through a tax foreclosure or through having exercised their rights under their own demolition lien that they place on the property. And once the land bank acquires title to the property, they always turn to the municipality and say, do you want the property? Now, that is a post-demolition occurrence, but it nevertheless is the case that municipalities end up with those properties in their own land banks, which leads to the third point, which is that I am aware of a couple of developers who have started infill projects in inner ring suburbs on the east side, and there is an interest in building new homes on these size lots. And the mayor, in fact, has asked me to set up a meeting with one such developer to explore the mechanics of that. What I have heard from those developers, and this is kind of a catch-22, is that they are looking for a critical mass of properties. They want to be able to send their crews in and build, 8 to 10 houses at a time. So that is a catch-22, as you know, but there should be an infill strategy because pocket parks work in isolation, but they can't exist throughout a city.
Yes, thank you. Mr. Weisman.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So much to unpack here, and it's 20 to 10, so I don't want to say everything that's on my mind. We have had this discussion many times before in this council about once we declare a house a nuisance, what happens to it? And we pleaded with the prior administration to come back to us because when there's free money, our our statutes contemplate us declaring it a nuisance and then us having to bid. But when there's free money, there's no bidding process. The money just comes in and they knock the property down. The land bank does require the title to be clear though before they'll knock a house down. So there's a lot of back and forth. They can't just take it if it has, like, there's a mortgage lien out there or a judgment lien. Those have to be clear, or they won't take the properties. You're not agreeing with me?
Well, I know of at least one instance in which the land bank has knocked down a property pursuant to a public nuisance declaration where the property owner was the property owner, not the land bank, at the time of the demolition.
Maybe these are donated properties for rehab, where they require it to be lien-free.
No, they were just satisfied that.
No, I'm saying, what I'm thinking of.
Perhaps.
Properties where they want to rehab them and they have to be lien-free, or because they can't, not going to put on work on them if there's actually a lien.
That's for sure.
Interesting that we're asking about our city's land bank. If you all remember the discussion we had, maybe it was an argument, but we pleaded with the prior administration before it was passed. How does it work? What is the procedures? What are the protocols? And we got Zippo back to us. And I think it's very important. I think it's one of the things I'd like to cover in my building committee meeting, but the biggest difference between the county land bank and our land bank is that our land bank is just a bunch of words on a piece of paper. We don't really know what it means. I think it can be effective, but there's a lot of issues to go on when a city says, I want to go in and own this house, because then you own everything that's there with the house. You own the cleanup, you own the danger, the problems. I know the house on Raymont because not this past election, but the first time I ran, so that would have been 2013 maybe, it was a problem then, and it was an eyesore. And these pictures don't do justice to what these people have to live with, because there's animals going in and out, there's who knows who going in and out. Once a house gets like this, no owner's going to deal with it. Right. They haven't dealt with it for 5 or 6 years. They're not going to come in and fix it now. So I'm in favor of, I would like to see the land bank come assess these houses. They have a whole host of people who can look at it. Can we rehab it? Can we not rehab it? I would be in favor of tearing it down, because if the land bank says so, because I think that's where their expertise lies. And then I think it's a lot better for the neighborhood to have an extra wide yard instead of a big, ugly, empty, vacant house there.
Yeah.
Well,
Thank you, Maggie.
When you look at the home on Raymont and you look to the right when you're facing the property, so there's one property to the west, that home was recently renovated by the land bank. They're already invested in the community.
Yes.
So I think there are positive indicators, but just as Councilman Wiseman said, that's their expertise. So I'm inclined to rely on them.
I would just like to add a few things, because I think that might help, if I may, before you proceed, Mr. Riddle. Okay, thank you. First of all, I don't want to have to tear down any houses if we don't have to. I would love to see these houses renovated. I went through these houses personally as part of the administrative search warrant. I was on the team that went in and looked around, and the house on Washington, even though it looks better from the street than the house on Raymont, the house on Washington has so many more problems inside than the one on Raymont. And yet, even with the problems it has, I could see how it was far enough along that nobody might want to take it on, but I could still see how beautiful it once was. And it was sad, because we have a lot of beautiful homes in the city. There's a reason we've called ourselves the City of Beautiful Homes for so long, because you see a house like this situated where it is on a great lot, granted a busier street, but I live on Washington too, and it has its both its positives and negatives to be on a busier street. But this particular house, the back of it has, the back of the property line has the open creek, which there's almost none of that in University Heights. But the culvert opens up and the creek is there, and it was a sight to behold. It was almost as beautiful to me as seeing how beautiful the house might have once been. The point here is we have a short window of opportunity to secure funding and have that in reserve and to force the issue. It is my hope that this is almost like a game of chicken, that if the funding is there, and if we say we don't want to demolish this house but we will, and we have the resources to do it, and this is what's going to happen, then either the owners or someone, the land bank, the county land bank, somebody will step forward and evaluate this house coolly, calmly, rationally, and hopefully renovate it. Otherwise, it will continue to be what it has been for the last several years, both of these, which is a house that continues to dilapidate and gets further and further along until all hope of trying to save either of these houses is gone. I will tell you that as mayor, I am not going to go as soon as this, if we apply for the funding and we have it, I'm not going to race out in 72 hours and tear down these houses. That is not my intention. It is my intention to demonstrate to the present owners, including the one with the clouded title, and I've looked at that a little bit, Patrick and I have looked at that a little bit, and it is, in my humble opinion, the cloud on the title continues to exist because of a lack of action by the probable proper owner of the two that are on the chain of title that are clouding it. And if he knows that if he doesn't do something, he's going to lose what he's got, and he will lose what he has if he doesn't do something, then he will finally be motivated to act. And that's the intention here. As far as the fact that we have our own land bank and the county has a land bank, I like that we have a land bank. We haven't fully realized what our own city land bank is and could be. The county land bank has far greater resources than our own land bank does, but that doesn't mean that we shouldn't ever use our own land bank for anything, that there aren't proper purposes for it from time to time. But this is an instance where, by moving this along, we have an opportunity to bring both of these homes to the county land bank's attention, and I would be delighted to I couldn't be more pleased to see both of these houses saved if that's possible, if things align that we can do that, because there is still some beauty in these houses, but time is running out. They're almost beyond saving. We're trying to force the issue so that they either can be saved or they can stop being a blight in the neighborhood, one way or the other, whether it's because they've been rehabbed or because we've had to raise them. I believe that the lots themselves and where they're situated are such that they would be ideal candidates for infill housing if it comes to that, especially the one with the creek in the back, because there is so little of that in our city. When I saw that, I said, wow, I'd love to live here. I would love to be able to look back and see a creek in my backyard. It would look great with some chickens right next to it, maybe. I don't know. Who am I kidding? I don't even have a dog. I'm not going to have chickens. But I respect and agree with Mr. Sims' opinion. I don't want to see houses torn down in this city. My parents worked for the Western Reserve Historical Society when I was a kid. I'm all about historic preservation, but I'm not about seeing something just fall to pieces before our eyes and bring the neighborhood down either. So we have to take action here, and that's what we're asking the council to do.
I happen to agree, and I believe in the land bank's expertise, although I'd like to see ours get going, and I would like to make a motion for, I'm not sure what this motion looks like, but to allow Mr. Grogan Myers to seek demolition funding from the land bank.
Well, it would be for the mayor
Is the
too, but
time-
we would use Mr.
well-
Grogan Myers to do that.
For the mayor, that's
Yes.
right. To,
And we should consider them separately, the
Okay.
two properties.
okay, so I want to make a motion requesting approval for the mayor to seek demolition funding for 3654 Raymont Boulevard.
Second.
All right, we have a motion by Mrs. Pardee, a second by Mr. Wiseman. As to the first item, letter H, is there any further discussion? Mr. Weisman.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. The primary problem I had with declaring properties nuisance like this is sort of an open-ended thing where we don't really know what's going to happen, was that we weren't getting the information that I thought we needed to from the past administration. I think that's gone now. I think we're getting all the information that we need, and I'm impressed with how involved you are in the process and how much of a deep understanding you have about not only the land bank but the properties themselves and what might be waiting for them. Glad to see Mr. Grogan Myers in a meeting. Not only are you here, you're doing things. You bring us the tax thing and you just do this stuff. I think it's fantastic, and I'm glad to see that we're moving forward and actually taking charge of these things, because once they sit for song, you have to take some action. It's not the best action that you wish you would have, but letting these houses stay where they are, I think, is a tenable solution. So I am pleased with the administration and support this wholeheartedly.
Thank you, Mr. Weisman.
Yes, and so I would
Mr.
just
Sims.
like to state that my concern is not in opposition to moving forward with this particular request. My concern is that we adopt approaches that will put us at a place where we can address properties like this before they become a public nuisance. My experience has been that we don't see anything, and it may have been the prior administration. Hopefully, this administration will be able to respond differently. That I don't know. For me, it's too early to call. But I do have confidence that we're moving in a better direction. But the only thing that I've ever seen is when it has reached a point where, in general, we have felt that it was such a nuisance and such a problem to the community that we didn't have any choice. And I'm concerned that we're going to continue to see that over and over again unless we at least raise it, think about it, and do something different. And that's the reason that I always try to press or impress my concern.
Thank you, and so noted and appreciated, Mr. Sims.
Very quickly before.
Mr. Weisman.
To cut in front of Ms. Cameron, I agree with you, Mr. Sims. I will point out that the vacant property ordinance that we passed at the beginning of the year allows the city to take this kind of proactive approach where they look at houses in foreclosure that have been vacant, where the foreclosing party may or may not be reporting to us, and make them fix the properties while the foreclosure is pending. So the idea is that as time goes on, these properties become fewer and fewer and fewer because we've had the bank, the foreclosing party, involved more meaningfully as time goes on. So.
Thank you, Mr. Weisman. Mrs. Cameron? All right, and I never got back to Mr. Ertl, so.
Yeah, and I'll pass on that, but in response to Mr. Sims, you don't see it, until it's in our lap as a very, bad situation. But there's a lot going on. I'm at the court, and I see this. People are brought to court because they're non-compliant, and that only happens after there's been a long back and forth with the resident, and negotiating and prodding and cajoling and whatever it takes to get them to get off the dime. And then once you get, and we always hear also, once one of these things is dumped in our lap, that it's been this way for a year and a half, 2 years, whatever. And you know this. It's because, there's, an older individual owns it and won't relinquish title to the next generation and is unable to do anything to the building itself and yada, yada, yada. And then you've got to chase them down through the, the family tree, and then it goes to the bank, and then it goes wherever. It's really a terrible process, and oftentimes, not oftentimes, but every once in a while it comes to us, and it's, do you try to prop it up and make something out of it, or do you just cut your losses, and we all have our respective opinions on that, so just for what it's worth.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Ertl. Is there anything further? Okay, I believe we do have a motion on the floor to authorize the mayor to seek demolition funding for 3654 Raymont Boulevard. Is that correct, Mrs. Thomas? Okay, thought so, okay. If there's no further discussion, Mrs. Thomas, we call the roll on the motion?
Mr. Rogers?
Aye.
Ms. Wiseman?
Aye.
Mr. Sims?
Aye.
Mrs. Pardee?
Aye.
Mr. Ertl?
Aye.
Mrs. Cameron? Aye. Mrs. Weiss?
Aye.
Okay, motion carries, thank you. Next would be, is there a motion to authorize the mayor to seek demolition funding for 3673 Washington Boulevard?
So moved.
Okay, motion by Mrs. Pardee, second by Mr. Rock. Is there any further discussion? Seeing none, Mrs. Thomas, we call the roll on this motion?
Mr. Rock?
Aye.
Mr. Wiseman?
Aye.
Mr. Sims?
Aye.
Mrs. Pardee?
Aye.
Mr. Ertl?
Aye.
Mrs. Cameron? Aye. Mrs. Weiss?
Aye.
Okay, motion carries, thank you. Next we have, and thank you, Mr. Grogan-Myers. Next, we have a motion to enter into agreement with Burgess Ambulance Sales for the purchase contract for a new 2017 Road Rescue Ultra Medic ambulance in an amount not to exceed $170,017. Interim Chief Bob Perko, will you please address the council on this matter?
Thank you, Mayor. Last November, council voted on entering an agreement with Burgess for a purchase of a rescue squad for $159,000. When I was appointed, I learned that this purchase had not been made yet by the prior chief. So I met with the ambulance committee and the sales rep, and we went over each item line by line from the ground up. Mainly because I had learned that over $30,000 was cut from the original proposal from our ambulance committee. And so I wanted to see what the items were cut. And so basically what you have before you for $170,000 is $10,000 extra in options that I felt were safety concerns or items we needed in order to make the equipment that we have charge properly and have proper room to store it. Basically, the $159,000 ambulance was a baseline per stock model. And any option in there starts to increase the price.
Very good. Thank you, Chief Perko. Mr. Rock.
Last year, when we reviewed this, there was considerable discussion on a cot loading system, and it wasn't included in the original motion to approve that purchase. Was that considered in this one?
We did consider it. It is not in this contract. However, it was in for capital improvements for this year.
Right.
I spoke with the BWC in depth about the previous grant that we got back in 2014 for the load system, the current frontline ambulance. And due to the fact that this did not start being made yet under production and how long it'll take for us to actually receive it at this point, we're going to try probably to apply for this BWC grant again, which we will be eligible to do so in June.
So if you apply for this grant and we're awarded the funds, that would go towards that cot loading system?
Correct.
Thank you.
Mayor.
Yes, Mrs. Purdy.
Thank you, Chief, Interim Chief. In your memo, which is really helpful, so I appreciate that too, you mentioned that $31,000 was cut from the proposal, and you mentioned air horns. You said there were a number of things that the chief cut that had to do with safety. Can you just tell us a couple more of those items that you put back in that he had cut?
Sure. Like you had said, air horns were probably one of the #1 safety concerns. Also was scene lighting, which, so as you know, we don't have mailboxes in the city. For us in the evenings, it's often difficult to find the addresses on the homes. And scene lighting is just an arrangement of lights on the ambulance that we could turn on to display a bright white light to help us find the right house, or if we're working out in the street in the roadway. And so none of that lighting was on the previous proposal. Same goes for compartment lighting in all of the compartments. There was no lighting in there. So if you're going to get equipment out in the middle of the evening, you probably would have difficulty seeing what you're doing. The stock ambulance did come with a couple of charging outlets, but it was nowhere near enough for some of the modern day equipment that we're carrying, with like our heart monitor and computer software, CPR machine, and suction units and things like that. So we had to add an arrangement of electrical outlets and USB ports to charge the equipment that we're using. And probably last of the other bigger ticket items were wiring capabilities for all the mobile radios that we use. The base model accepts a baseline wiring system for mobile radios, but there was no provisions in there for antennas or the particular systems that we use.
Thank you, Chief.
Mr. Weisman.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Chief, for your memo. Thank you for your thoroughness in going through the ambulance order and figuring out what we need and what we don't need. This question is sort of for the law director. I'm a little fuzzy on the council ordered it, but the chief didn't. Council approved it, but the chief didn't order it deal. How does that work? He can just not order the...
That's correct. It's an administrative act to enter into the contract and to finalize it. We had the same dust up in connection with the Cedar Taylor improvements. I mean, it was this. I can't speak to why he didn't order it, but it would be an administrative function to enter into the contract and to finalize the purchase of the vehicle.
And the fire chief can also just strip down the order and cut stuff off because he thinks we're spending too much for an ambulance?
Well, my understanding is that's not the way in which this happened. I think the ambulance that was presented to you was the $159,000 stripped down ambulance to begin with. That's what was approved. And I had been asked for advice as to whether the administration needs to come back to you for approval, and it's my judgment that they do, that this is a different vehicle with a different price and therefore a different contract. So.
All right, so it's just a really question of administrative follow-up to the dictates of council to make sure this stuff gets done as approved.
Yeah.
Okay.
Sure.
And Chief, who's on the ambulance? I've heard the phrase ambulance committee several times. Who's on this committee?
The prior chief selected 3 members from one of our shifts, which was Captain Picella, Firefighter Kalo, and Firefighter Kirkowitz.
Okay, and these are, so these are gentlemen, I guess you approve of them, you could pick a new ambulance committee. This is an internal fire department thing that.
Correct,
Okay.
but I did continue with that previous committee to get their take on how it all transpired from the inception of this project.
Okay. And would it be, is the mayor a part of that, and the mayor is the safety director? Is it appropriate to have the mayor's input, or?
We would welcome his input if he'd like to.
Okay, all right. That's it, okay, thank you, Mr. Lauder.
Okay. Thank you. Mr. Sims.
My question is really to the finance director, because I think the original approval was in 2017, and that was probably out of the 2017 budget. So how does all of this work in 2018?
So we eliminated all POs from 17. So there's a new item in the budget for $170,000 for 2018.
In the budget as approved, or
In the
are we
budget that's
amending?
approved.
Okay.
And I'd just like to point out that this is for 170-17. It's going to make it tough to pay for because we're over our allotted amount of 170. I know it's only $17, but it makes it difficult to actually cut the check. So.
There a cup holder or something you can remove?
I don't know. Honestly, I don't understand.
I don't understand either.
Because your motion is for the 170-17.
Right.
Right.
But what I understand, Bill, Mr. Sheehan, is that we only have 170
In the budget.
even on the,
So if all the other projects pan out to be to their full amount, we'll be short.
$17. But
Oh.
at this
We
point,
can transfer funds over, though,
yeah, and we could
And
transfer
amend,
17.
yeah.
But at this point,
for $17.
Director, that shouldn't be an issue. I mean, because, I mean, I don't know that the council approved it in the budget. I mean, we approved $170,000 in the budget. Is that what you're saying?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
All right.
I'm sorry, I thought when we discussed this ambulance that was presented to us, that it had been approved as a 2017 expenditure, and that's why I don't see council approving, and at the end of 17, $150,000 ambulance, or how much it was for the 18 budget before we even talked about the budget, right?
That's what
Wasn't
he just
this-
said.
I understand, but I thought this was presented to us as being something where we had budgeted for a new ambulance and it was being presented to us. Is that not what anybody else remembers?
I can speak to that maybe. I did go look back in the council minutes from last year where it was stated on the record that it was for a capital improvement project in 2017.
Right.
When we were going through the review process of the spec to see if we needed to make any alterations, because we really didn't know in January if we would have any increase. And I had to present the capital improvements to the finance committee. I speculated the 170,000 based on some of the discussions we were having. And I was still trying to research to see if the money really was to come out of 2017, like it indicated in the previous minutes, or if it was gonna come out of this year, because I wasn't really sure how to put my plan together accordingly. So that's where the 170 came from, was from speculation of the options we may need, and so it landed $17 above that as it resulted.
Thank you, but that doesn't clear it up for me.
It wasn't ordered last year. It was approved last year, but it wasn't ordered. So even if there was a purchase order open to encumber the funds, the finance director closed the purchase order, so effectively, there's nothing there.
So
We
we
have
start
to,
over.
right,
No, I
it's like
understand
starting,
that, but
okay.
if it was presented to us as being something we had budgeted for in the 2017 budget, then there should be $170,000 or $160 left over from
Well,
the
it's part,
2017.
It's part of the
it's part of the
surplus.
surplus, Mark. Yeah. That's part of what made up the surplus.
Now that's how you answer questions.
There we go.
Thank you,
So-
Chief, thank you, Mayor.
But,
Yes.
well, I would like,
I just have a legal question. Since this was approved in 2017, does that expire? Or, I mean, you can't just go and buy 2 ambulances right now because we make 2 motions, right?
Well, you have to appropriate the funds in the current year. But yeah, so there are a couple of issues there, and that's why they're back before you.
Yeah, we're not buying 2 ambulances.
I understand,
Yeah.
but I just want to make sure, because we've already made a motion, that that's cleared, or do we need to add?
You don't need to
rescind that
rescind,
motion?
you don't need to rescind anything. This is a contract unto itself for a vehicle that wasn't contemplated last year.
and so, Mayor,
Yes.
I'd like to make a motion to enter into an agreement with Burgess Ambulance Sales for the purchase contract for a new 2017 Road Rescue Ultramedic ambulance in an amount not to exceed $170,017.
Okay, we have a motion by Mrs. Pardee and a second by Mrs. Weiss. Is there any further discussion? Seeing none, Mrs. Thomas, will you call the roll?
Mr. Rock?
Aye.
Mr. Weiss?
Aye.
Sims?
Aye.
Mrs. Pardee?
Aye.
Mr. Earl?
Aye.
Mrs. Hammond? Aye. Mrs. Weiss?
Aye.
Okay, motion passes. Thank you, and thank you, Chief Burko.
Thank you. Okay, yes.
Next up is a motion for authorization to purchase in the Ohio Department of Transportation 418-19 Summerfield contract for road salt. Mr. Picorni, will you please address the council on this?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, thank you, council. Good evening. This item is for the purchase of road salt to be stored in Cleveland Heights and used by University Heights. The state of Ohio has decided to go out this year and do a summer fill program, which means sometime between bid opening and August, they will deliver salt in the quantity that we agree to purchase. The purchase agreement, I believe I attached a copy of it to you. There is a clause in there saying that we will purchase 100% of the amount that we have them bid for us. This is part of the state cooperative purchase program, and I'm requesting council's authorization to purchase 1,500 tons of road salt under this program.
Thank you, Mr. Picorni. Mrs. Weiss.
Thank you. Thanks for the service director. Were the amounts adjusted at all for next year based on possibly salting more of the side streets?
What is the amount of the total amount to be purchased? Well, we haven't reached the total amount we're going to purchase yet. The second opportunity to purchase salt will come out in June. Now, generally, we have yearly use of around 2,000 to 2,500. We're a little higher this year because of the earlier snows. We can add to that if we wish to do more salting. But that opportunity will present itself in June when we get, or actually it'll come out in May for the winter salt program with ODOT.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Picorni. Mr. Sims.
Yes. In the past, I've seen contracts where we had the option of purchasing as little as 80% and up to 120% of the amount that we agreed to. I don't know if that went away, if that's still available, why this is written this way. And then my second question is related to the price? Is it customary that we would order salt and not know how much we're gonna pay for it?
It is customary, and to back up with your earlier question, the previous state contracts of several years ago were required 80% minimum purchase up to 120. That has now changed. Our most recent contract was 90% minimum up to 110. And I'm anticipating that the next contract coming out will be that same number, 90
In
to
general.
110 for
Okay,
2018.
because I also recall, and I don't know how long ago it has been, and I've sat here for 10 years now, but I recall a great amount of conversation over the price per ton that we were going to pay, and that was prior to the purchase of the salt. So now you're telling me that we're going to agree to purchase 1,500 tons of salt without any idea of what it's going to cost.
Well, I'm not sure we don't have any idea.
Well, there's
Salt this
nothing
year,
in here.
well, that's correct. Salt this year was bid, and we've been paying $29.12 a ton, which is lower than we've had in many years.
Right.
Previous 3 years prior to that was around $51, $52 a ton. And I would anticipate that the 29 is going to go back up, and it's not going to be at $30 a ton for very long. But I would anticipate that we're not going to get back to the $50 a ton mark quite yet. But yes, you are agreeing, and in all the state contracts that we've done, we've agreed to purchase that number without having a price per ton. If you look at item G in the contract attached to the memo, item G does give us the ability to get out of it within 24 hours of bid opening. So they will notify us what the bid prices were, and if for some reason we don't like the number, we can get out within 24 hours.
Thank you.
Mr. Wiseman.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. McCorney. So we paid $29 last year, meaning this winter. Years past, it's been $50. So that's sort of the threshold we're looking at to see if it's going to be between those two numbers when the bid's open. We'll have that information.
That's what I would anticipate.
And it would take, I'm guessing, a special council meeting to get out of this contract, or could the mayor just get out of the contract?
I believe the mayor could get out of it with a written letter.
Yeah, that would be an administrative.
All right. So if the administration would just keep an eye on that, and pay $29 this year for salt, if this price is $50 or $60, then it certainly doesn't make sense. I mean, assuming we're doing this because you think we buy the salt now, when nobody wants it, it'll be cheaper than when we buy it.
Well, if you recall the past winter here, although we've ordered approximately 3,000 tons worth of salt for the winter, we had difficulty getting it delivered. So this being delivered through the summertime, I would anticipate we'll have no problem getting it delivered. It'll all be here before August.
Did we do this last year? Did we do a
Last time
summertime
we
buy?
participated in the summer fill program was 2014. They did not offer it in 15 or 16.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Welcome. Anyone else? Is there a motion?
I'll second.
Okay, motion by Mrs. Cameron, second by Mr. Rock. Any further discussion? Seeing none, Mrs. Thomas, we call the roll.
Mr. Rock?
Aye.
Mr. Weisman?
Aye.
Mr. Sims?
Aye.
Mrs. Pardee?
Aye.
Mr. Earl?
Aye.
Mrs. Cameron?
Aye.
Mrs. Wise? Aye.
Okay, thank you. Motion passes. Next up is a motion for authorization to enter into contract with the Kurtz Brothers, Inc. for yard waste disposal service. Mr. Picorni, will you continue, resume the floor?
Yes, thank you again. We collect yard waste on an annual basis. Leaves collected by vacuum in the fall and during the month of April, and then brush and lawn leaf bags throughout the year, every month of the year, every week, and Christmas trees following Christmas period. All of that material in the past several years has been delivered to Cleveland Heights, co-mingled with their brush and lawn waste products, and then trucked to Green Vision Materials, who recycles it and maintains that waste stream. Recently, Cleveland Heights has written me a letter indicating that they wanted to up our $7,000 cost to a cost of $44,000 per year.
Huh?
They didn't really offer an
7,000?
explanation. Yes.
To 44?
Correct.
That is correct.
This happened several years ago with our solid waste stream as well.
Oh my
I believe
goodness.
they'd like to get out of the business of handling other people's waste and let us deal with our own waste.
Okay.
So I went out to 4 different companies and asked for quotations on what it would cost to dispose of our yard waste with their facilities, and I provided that to you in this memo. Kurtz Brothers was $2 per cubic yard for leaves, and $5 per cubic yard for grass and brush. And brush would be including the Christmas trees that I mentioned earlier. The other 3 firms below, M, Boyas, and Green Vision, all offered similar programs but were more expensive. Green Vision had offered a lower cost overall. However, they wanted us to open and clean out the lawn leaf bags, those are the craft paper bags that we collect year-round, and they wanted us to pick any kind of debris, rocks, dirt, other materials, flower pots out of that material before delivering it to them. And that just is labor-intensive and prohibitive for
Right.
our current operation. And the cost savings of $4,000 would not cover the cost of doing that cleaning. So I'm recommending we go with Kurtz Brothers in the amount of $10,625, and that's an estimate based on cubic yards of what we expect to deliver them in 1 year period.
Thank you, Mr. Picorni. Are there any questions for Mr. Picorni on this? All right, is there a motion?
I have a question.
Oh, we have a question. Mr. Erdl.
What was your reply to Cleveland Heights?
I let them know. I have not let them know anything yet because I did not have an opportunity to price it out with others.
I think Mr. Erdl wants to.
All right. Is there a motion?
So moved.
All right, motion by Mr. Erdl, second by Mrs. Weiss. Any discussion on the motion? Seeing none, Mrs. Thomas, will you call the roll?
Aye.
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 Very good. Motion passes. Thank you, Mr. Picorni. Okay, next item on the agenda is a motion to hold an executive session immediately following this regular meeting for the purpose of discussing personnel, legal, and real estate matters. Yes, I do have a personnel matter and a real estate matter to discuss with counsel and the law director only. So if we could entertain a motion for that, please.
I'll make a motion to hold executive session for the purpose of entertaining real estate and personnel matters.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion, a second by Mrs. Pardee and Mr. Wiseman. Assuming no discussion, Mrs. Thomas, will you call the roll?
Mr. Rock?
Aye.
Mr. Weisman?
Aye.
Mr. Zelm?
Aye.
Mr. Pardee?
Aye.
Mr. Earl?
Aye.
Mr. Hammond? Aye.
Directors' reports. Finance, Mr. Sheehan.
I've been working with vendors to get quotes on recabling the campus here, and I'm almost through with that. I should have quotes back to me by next week. It's a very complex issue. There's issues with what type of cable to get between the buildings, how many drops we need, things like that. So we're slowly but surely working through those issues. That's my report.
Very good. Thank you, Mr. Sheehan. Director of Law, Mr. McConville.
Mayor, just want to let council know that I will be forwarding a draft and model ordinance to Mrs. Weiss regarding tax abatement for consideration at the governmental affairs meeting on the 9th.
Very good. Thank you, Mr. McConville. Public safety, we'll start with Interim Chief Rogers. Good evening, Chief.
Three items I'd like to discuss this evening, get you up to speed. In the next week or two, we're going to have a electronic speed radar sign. Some of this picture here that we're putting out throughout the community. This specific device, it's solar powered with battery backup. The company that we used to get the equipment, Elon City, they provided significant research and data that indicates that this type of device, again, we're talking approximately 2x3 portable sign that, again, has a solar power capacity. It has a significant impact on when drivers are shown and displayed their speed with a signal to slow down on corrective behavior and corrective driving. In addition to that, this device also has the ability to record data and allow us to better judge the type of traffic that is at that location. And it's also portable, so we have the ability that based on complaints or concerns reference driving habits at specific locations that we can move it around and use it to substantiate complaints in the area and also deter people from driving reckless or faster than they should.
I'm already working on my list of intersections.
Next item was actually brought up at the last regularly scheduled council meeting by a member of the community. It's specific to the intersection at Traymore and Siebert. Specifically, prior to last year's resurfacing program, there was at that location, Traymore, the actual word stop that was painted on the road. At this point, it's been determined that that is no longer at that location, and I'm seeking a resolution to have it back to the way it was prior to resurfacing to show and indicate the word stop at the intersection. Over the past 2 weeks, we've been working, the mayor as well, with Swenson's representatives, me specifically with the regional management to address concerns and complaints related to a noise that may have been created or impacted by their scheduling of food delivery at that time. Again, we've been working with them to accommodate potential changes to mitigate those type of complaints from occurring at that location during their originally scheduled times that they're delivering food, and they seem very receptive to work towards preventing a circumstance that could create noise complaints. Additionally, there are some parking complaints over there. We're still in the process of resolving or getting signage up that would mitigate those circumstances as well.
Yes, Mr. Weisman.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Swenson's was getting deliveries at what time?
It was relayed to me that they were getting deliveries very early on.
Early in the day?
In the morning, around 5 a.m.
And they've changed that to?
Within our time frame that would allow for work to be done or maintenance or delivery after 8 a.m.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Chief.
No problem.
It's worthy of noting that the individual who complained didn't phone it in contemporaneously, rather wrote a letter to the mayor and the chief after the fact, so there was no way to investigate in real time whether their delivery was at the time he alleged or whether it was, in fact, unduly noisy.
That's correct, and it was also forwarded to him that when something like that is occurring, we need to be contacted so we can get to that location at the time that's occurring to be able to substantiate or to try to mediate and mitigate further escalation of the problem.
Yes. Thank you, Chief. Anything else? Very, okay. Oh, Mrs. Cameron.
Yes, I just had a question regarding the signage. You're going to buy one and move it around?
Prior to me getting the position of interim, Chief Hammett was looking at buying, I'm sorry, you're talking about the Swenson signage part or the radar sign?
The radar sign.
The radar sign that we obtained it can be used and moved around the city. It just attaches to a pole.
Oh, okay.
So we bought this with the intention of having the ability to use a specific resource to address complaints in the community and substantiate them as well by collecting data, as well as a deterrent to drivers who may be driving reckless or speeding.
When you say collect data, what exactly does the thing collect?
So whenever it gets any type of recording in terms of the speed on a vehicle, it's counting not just vehicles, but also speeds, average speeds, high speeds. It can create a range from a specific date at that location that we can determine. We can look at an average and say, is this really a legitimate complaint or an issue at this location? Then we can reinforce it with specific resources to do traffic enforcement. And again, the data that it can obtain is significant.
Okay.
Again, from averages to ranges, it's
Okay.
a valuable tool to help
As
us
long
address
as it
the
don't
issues.
say little green Altima. Little black.
Again, it's just strictly data. There's no recording or video or use for anything beyond collecting. Just recording data at that point.
Okay.
Mhm.
And then the other thing I wanted to ask was, where is your top location you plan to put that sucker first?
Well, this list has been, again, established by our traffic officer, Tim Burgess, again, prior to me being in this position. But the first location we're looking at is on Sylvia Road, near South Belmore. We have a history of complaints from that area and that location of speeders, and obviously the vicinity of a school district and students walking. That'd be a primary location we want to use a resource like this at. Also on that list, we're looking at Washington Boulevard near Edgerton and also Washington Boulevard at Claver. Again, this is based on statistics and data that had been compiled prior to me being as interim chief, but the list was put together.
Thank you. Mr. Ertl?
What did that cost?
Again, this was purchased prior to my ability to confirm the price or the knowledge of it. I have the records for it. I can look it up and provide it. But on average, they're around $3,000.
Yeah, I was going to say, if Chief Hammett purchased the one I suggested he look at, I believe it was on sale for $2,300. But I don't have the receipt in front of me either.
I'm sure I have it at the office.
That's fine.
Okay.
Ballpark's fine.
Mhm. Thank you, Chief. All right, Chief Perko.
Thank you. We spoke briefly at the last special council meeting about the fire engine that needs some repairs. Repairs on the motor of it are underway and it's expected to be back in service this week. Monthly report for the month of March, we responded to 99 emergency incidents. 55 of them were EMS in nature, 44 in fire. Of that 44, 8 had to do with fires inside of the home, 2 being structural, and 1 passenger vehicle fire. We provided aid to our neighbors 19 times, and they helped us out 7 times.
Thank you, Chief Perko. Does anybody have any questions for the interim chief? Very good. Thank you. Next, Building Commissioner, Mr. McReynolds.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you for having me tonight. As was explained earlier, we now have a mechanism to obtain and execute search warrants. This is a very good tool and a very important tool for the building department to have, not only to answer questions that may come up when we're proposing nuisances for consideration, but also to determine the structural stability of our homes. Something that I asked for immediately when I started here, and now that we have it in place, I'm very grateful that we do have it. Also, Belfair Community has begun work on their projects. They're at the stage now where they're doing demo and site preparation. The plans that they had obtained to begin with had errors on them, so we're discovering that we're making changes to the plans that they were using for the site prep. We're finding that water lines were abandoned in the past and haven't been notified, so we're bringing all that up to date as we go along. Any questions?
Okay, seeing none, thank you, Mr. McReynolds. And I'd like to take this opportunity to thank Prosecutor Astreb, even though he's not here, for his work with Mr. McReynolds and others here at the city to get the administrative search warrant process underway so that we could do the searches we did this last week. Next, community development, Mr. Grogan Myers.
Thank you, Mayor. Two items of note for you, Council. Mayor Brennan signed the NOPEC grant agreement. So if you recall, that's the approximately $44,000 that you allowed him to accept earlier this year. And with Council's permission, I'd like to refer that to Councilman Sims' committee under Service and Utilities, because this grant is designed to bring energy improvements and energy savings to the residents of the city.
Oh, sure. Let's give it to Sid.
It seemed like a place to fit, but of course, it'll be an iterative process, something that will require substantial public feedback. So certainly any thoughts and feedback you guys have would be very greatly appreciated. And the second thing is now that a federal budget is in place, if you've noticed, there were substantial increases in CDBG funding, which is very good for us in terms of at least the grant prospects. As a result, we will be holding a CDBG public hearing on Thursday, April 19th at 6:30 here in council chambers. And that will be designed to be an open forum to allow residents and council and just community stakeholders to give their feedback on potential ideas for that grant funding. The county, just as a refresher, we apply to the county every year for these CDBG funds because we're not large enough to be considered an entitlement community. That's a community that automatically gets a share of the CDBG funding by nature of the size of our population. So we have to apply to the county every year. The county has not set a date for when this application period will be open, but when they do, we want to be ready because we're already into April, so they'll be looking for shovel-ready projects. So we want to be a little bit ahead of the game and considering what projects we'd like to consider as a community.
Okay, very good. Thank you, Mr. Grogan Myers. Is there any questions for him? Just one small thing I wanted to add. If you could, as a reminder, so that because I may forget to ask her, I know that Lisa Marinick is working on our draft Trash Tribune, and I know that particular date for that CDBG funding meeting isn't in the present draft, so if you could make a note to ask Lisa to add that meeting to the announcements of upcoming dates, I would appreciate that. Thank you, sir. All right. That leaves, Mr. Cheney, did you have anything? Our city engineer. Yes, of course you do.
Thank you. Real quick, I want to thank council for approving the contract for Silsby, which I was out of town when that happened. But we are having a pre-construction meeting tomorrow with the contractor, and he told me on the phone to start next week. By contract, he has to be done by May 21st, so he has to get started. Asphalt plants will be open hopefully later this week, and we're going to get started. But you'll see construction right out in front of City Hall here. It's from Edgerton all the way to Warrensville Center. End of report.
Thank you, Mr. Cheney. Can't wait to, I don't think I'll ever be so happy to see road construction as to see that being done. All right. That leaves us with council reports. And of course, I don't have my list of council committees right here, so, thank you. Building, Mr. Wiseman.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. There's a building committee a week from tonight. I don't know whether it's at 7 o'clock or at 8 o'clock, but the other time slot will be for government affairs, so come to both of them if you'd like. I believe we're having them at the library. We haven't asked them yet, but I don't imagine Monday at 7 to 9 is going to be a trouble spot with them. So.
Yeah, building is at 7.
Sorry, building's at 7. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So I will, we can effort that this week. We'll talk to the library hopefully and make sure that we can have it there. But I checked the website, but I anticipated being at the library. It worked out last time. It's a very comfortable room. We're going to discuss, I made some notes, our land bank, the moratorium on the prohibition of 300 related people in residence, and something else that I'm forgetting. So we can either sit here and wait till I remember it, or I'll update it.
I think we're going to talk about the Bushnell a little bit more, the street signs. Was that it?
The Bushnell.
The Bushnell, right, okay,
Something else then.
probably.
That's it for me. Thank you, Mayor.
Okay, thank you. Civic information, Mrs. Cameron.
No report.
Okay, finance, Mrs. Pardee.
I just want to thank everyone once again for all the hard work on the budget, all the meetings, the directors who came and presented. It was most appreciated. The discussion was hearty. The budget is in place, and we will be monitoring the progress as it rolls out. We'll have a meeting in another couple of months or so after other committees have meetings to talk about some other financial matters. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Pardee. Is there a question?
No, I have a question.
Yes.
Is there a way for us to utilize the strengths of Mr. Sheehan's department to monitor going forward those items that were approved by council to ensure that we do not miss buying things that we've allotted money for?
I think there will be a method to monitor that and ask, so good point.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mrs. Cameron, and thank you again, Mrs. Pardee. Governmental Affairs, Mrs. Weiss.
Thank you, Mayor. We will be having a meeting at 8 o'clock on Monday at the library. And I want to thank the law director for doing the research for the ordinance. I've had a meeting with the Cleveland Heights. His name's Tim Boland. I'm not exactly sure what his title is.
Okay.
But, so we have some information to share.
Great.
Very good. I believe he's their Economic Development Director.
I think so.
Yes, okay. Very good. Recreation, Mr. Ertl.
No report, Mayor.
Okay, Safety, Mr. Rock.
Yes, Mayor, we are in the process of trying to schedule a meeting for April. We're looking at April 17th, 19th, and 30th. Right now, the most consensus falls on the 17th, so probably plan accordingly for April 17th. We'll discuss, it's more of a kickoff to the Safety Committee. We'll discuss ideas that were generated out of our police and fire chief, and we have a budget in place now which has additional programs, additional things in there. So we'll discuss how we can make sure we get those implemented because it's part of our budget now. One thing we had talked about last year was Neighborhood Watch. There is a committee of residents there were people that were interested. So I'd like to discuss that a little further to see how we can get them engaged in this program.
Okay, very good. Thank you, Mr. Rock. Service and Utilities, Mr. Sims.
We will meet, the committee will meet on April 10th at 7 p.m.
Yes. With lots of great things to discuss. Thank you, Mr. Sims. Committee of the Whole, anything, Mrs. Purdy?
No.
Okay, no report.
No report, Mayor. Thank you.
Okay, well then, that leaves us with the executive session. We'd like to thank all of you for being here this evening. It was a lengthy meeting, but there was a lot that we had to cover and a lot that we got done. Cheers to those of you who made it all the way to the bitter end. Thank you and have a good night.